Welcome and good evening, everyone. Great to see you all again, and looking forward to tonight's meeting. Thank you for coming prepared and ready to have a lively discussion. We have two main topics tonight, but of course, we're happy to veer off course if that's the committee's desire tonight. But the main things that we'll cover tonight is just a little homework, a little housekeeping on the upcoming meetings to make sure that we're all on the same page there. We're going to talk a little bit about a potential exercise at an upcoming meeting that Brian will talk a little bit about. And then we also, of course, are here to talk tonight about curriculum instruction and assessment. And we have our two guest speakers here tonight who will meet shortly and hear from them, have an opportunity to engage in a conversation. And then tonight we will definitely talk about community engagement and communication. So that'll be an important part of the meeting. We want to spend a little time talking about what the committee's, how the committee would like to approach communication with the community, and we can talk about that in greater detail tonight as well. Are there any other agenda items or things that folks would like to make sure that we cover today that's not on the agenda? Okay, great. Well, we'll jump right into it then. With the approval of minutes, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of March 4th, which have been edited to reflect a question we had, you remember, that came up that Chris Leopold then provided some updated language for. So did folks get a chance to review that? And do I have a motion?
Can we combine the motion for both sets of minutes?
Yes, we can. Yes, that would be fine.
I'll make the motion that we approve the minutes from March 4th, 2015, the edited version, and March 10th, 2015.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, motion carries. Minutes are approved. Thank you. Agenda item 3, I don't know if folks got a chance to take a look at the memo that I sent out, that Ben sent out on my behalf last week. But we got some great feedback from our last meeting from all of you doing your 1-minute rights. And so what we wanted to do was to incorporate your feedback in how we're going to conduct our meetings going forward. So we want to make sure that we do that again before the close of tonight's meeting, because it was such a valuable experience for me especially, but also an opportunity for you to make sure that your voice is always, you always have a chance to have your voice heard as well. One of the things that I think is on all of our minds is the fact that, our committee has a lot of work to do in a very short amount of time, and so we want to make sure that our time together is productive. So what we tried to do for tonight was to make sure that you had the materials, that you were able to review them and to think of questions and observations, that you could come to the meeting prepared to engage right in a conversation, so that we wouldn't necessarily have to ask our guests to go through the presentation if the slides were available beforehand. So hopefully you've had a chance to review them, and we'll get into a little bit of a discussion right away, as opposed to sitting through a long presentation and then getting to questions. So we'll try to continue to do that as we move forward. We may have a couple of bumps in the road with folks being able to get their materials together in time, but our goal will be to try to get you the material as soon as we can, so that you have time to do a little bit of homework and come prepared for the meetings. So we did switch up the order. You may recall at one of our earlier meetings we had a slightly different order, and even though we sort of had to make some of these changes because of scheduling issues, I do think that it's important that we're actually talking about curriculum first. Because in my view, students and the outcome and the benefit of students should be our primary focus. So the fact that we're starting with curriculum and instruction, and then special education and support services on the week April 8th meeting, and then on the 27th of April, we've invited some folks to come and talk about the experience in Chittenden East. We're wrestling with similar issues, but maybe different issues and questions, but I think we thought it would be important to hear from them, to get their feedback on how that experience went, and maybe to learn some of the pitfalls that they've experienced so that we don't necessarily repeat them. So I think that would be a really great evening discussion. And then finally, in May, our first May meeting, we will finally get to a conversation about financials. And that'll be with Grant and Roger. They will be here to talk about that aspect. And we'll try to get, again, those presentations to you ahead of time so you have time to think about questions and observations prior to the meeting. Does that sound good? So it is fluid. Brian and I have been talking about how to make sure that we are addressing the right questions and the right themes. I think part of that conversation will continue as we begin to talk about how best to engage the community. But I want to be respectful of the fact that the committee itself has a lot of learning to do and a lot of questions of our own that we want to ask. So as I mentioned in my memo, I really see that the communication with the community happening in two phases. And I'm happy to think of a different way if there's a better way to think about it. But primarily, I'd like to focus our communication efforts first and foremost on what would we like to know from the community as we are learning a lot about this process and a lot about the districts and the key questions. And then as we get into phase two, once we come up with a recommendation and have made a decision about what we want to recommend to the community, I think then we'll need another sort of phase of communication and engagement with our communities. So as a broad outline, that's sort of how I envision that going, and we could talk more about that tonight when we get to that agenda item. So I want to give Brian a chance to talk a little bit about an exercise that we'll probably engage in at our next meeting, where we might get into some more of these questions.
Yeah, one of the things that Brenda and I discussed was I felt in terms of the suggestion actually came to take that feedback and try to create some themes. What were the perspectives that people were offering up? And as you probably discovered as you went through that, there's a wide range of opinions of what people are interested in hearing more about, or some different things that people would like to hear more about. So part of our discussion was giving people an opportunity and maybe gearing up for the next meeting for this with an opportunity for people to take a look at that feedback again and whatever we get back from tonight. And I agree or disagree as to whether those themes are the appropriate kind of structure around your discussions, but also giving people an opportunity in smaller groups to have some discussion to identify what you see as priorities, and then having a larger group discussion about that. So everybody's voice gets heard, and that can be kind of sifted through as we break out a small group. So in our discussion today, we felt that the two topics that you had, one, the curriculum instruction and assessment, and the community engagement and communications were the two critical pieces tonight. So we didn't want to go there tonight, but again, we're really kind of in the infancy stage. So we're getting a little bit closer to information, and I think, as Brenda said, we've been able to start off with both superintendent perspectives to get a good broad look at the organizations and what's going on, and I think starting with the curriculum instruction assessment makes sense. So that's our thinking for the next week, that we would build that into the agenda, if that makes sense. But your feedback was very helpful, and I'm not sure if being able to see the feedback afterwards in terms of what everybody's thoughts were, but I hope that was at least informative for you. And I very much appreciate the fact that people were as quick as you were in terms of getting that back. I think we got everybody included in there. And I was intentional in terms of allowing it to be without your name attached. So people can just take the statements for what they're worth. And so some people are a little bit more comfortable with that than others. And then the last piece I just want to add in terms of a acknowledgement of Brendan's comment about our adjusted schedule. When we've got the special ed and student support services next week, because of the week turnaround, and because of schedule on staff part, we probably won't have that information done until at least the end of the day Monday. We will try to get that to you any sooner if it's ready, but we'll anticipate that we'll get it to you by Monday, and I think you'll find the substance of what Erin and Jessica present will be informative, and we can go from there. If we need more time as we continue along, we will. And then I think we get further ahead with the finance by having a longer gap, and can put that information together so people have a chance to digest before that presentation. Okay? So, people okay with the small group thinking in terms of getting some activity? Just focus. So you can get engaged with each other and understand different perspectives that are among the group.
I think one of the things we heard loud and clear through the feedback was, while the committee likes to receive information, we also want to make sure we have time to actually discuss the information. So I think that's an important part of the process that we want to make sure we capture in the meetings going forward.
And there's, these themes that were identified, I'm not wedded to them in any way. I just tried to be as broad thinking as I could with the thoughts and suggestions people had made. So that's kind of what we're working with, and we'll frame the discussion next week around that.
Great, thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
So any questions on format feedback? Great. Well, we'll jump right into it then. Tonight, one of the main items for discussion is a look at curriculum, instruction, and assessment with Ellen Thompson and Amy Cole. They're here. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And we're looking forward to the opportunity to talking with you, but hearing from you first. So we'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves and to give a little bit of an introduction. And then I'd like to sort of go at this in two ways. First, as you've looked through the presentation materials, did you have any questions about the material that was presented? And you can access that through your Chromebooks here if you need to refresh your memory. And then secondly, what were some questions that came to your mind as you read through the presentation materials? What were some thoughts that or questions that maybe have been on your mind for a number of years about curriculum and assessment and instruction as it relates to our sort of key question of consideration here for this committee? So without further ado, I will turn it over to both of you and give you a chance to introduce yourself and set up our conversation.
As you might imagine, two curriculum coordinators have a lot to say, so we tried to make it as brief as we could, okay? So that's kind of important here. The other part, Amy and I, as we worked together on this one, we kept saying sort of over and over, there's so many things we do the same, yet there's a little difference to them. So much of what you see in the presentation that you already saw just outlines those key details, the things that really kind of keep us up at night. And what we wanted to do was to take a few minutes to kind of introduce ourselves from our own perspective in the work that we do. And then the rest of it is really, we can go through those questions. I think that will work really well. If you took a look at this first slide, you probably noticed we're more same than different when you look at the actual responsibilities we have. There's probably, well, I'll let you take a look at it. What do you notice as a difference? Or a similarity, go either way. Go ahead.
Well, Amy's responsible for ELL coordination.
Which is English language learners. Yeah.
And that's not listed in.
Right. And in our district, Jessica Little, our student information services person, support person is it for ELL. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah.
My role is not only technology integration, but also technology infrastructure. So that's going to be a major difference that you'll hear me talk about a little bit. Amy does technology integration, which is very similar, again, as well as part of the job too.
Which may be a good opportunity to point to the gentleman you see every night in
Vince.
the back, Vince Ganella, who's in charge of our technology infrastructure.
So we each prepared a little bit of a slide just to start us off with our mission statements. And again, as you read them through, there are great similarities. There's also brevity in one and then more words, but for the most part, the mission statement that we have in Essex Town is our district mission statement. So all of our schools work with this one statement. And it is the statement for us that's bound to our ends policies. So, and we are a policy governance school district. So the mission for us is about providing that quality education, I want to make sure I say it right, to all children to ensure their success in a rapidly changing world. And Amy?
The mission statement that you see here is actually more of a central office mission statement. Each of our schools have school-based mission statements that speak a little bit more closely to learning. Sort of the catchphrase that you don't see here that's often used is connect and lead, lead and connect, because as a supervisory union, we do need to look at maximizing our resources. But really, the focus there are the areas that are highlighted at the end, and that's how we have our current action plans organized around student learning and achievement, safe and respectful learning environments, and then the issue of equity is something that comes up quite a bit for us in our work.
I don't understand why different schools need different mission statements. Aren't all schools doing the same thing?
Different between us?
Different between any schools. Why? Shouldn't all schools have the same mission statement?
It's sort of.
Explain this to me, because I'm not an educator, so I'm looking for.
It's interesting, there's an interesting book, and I know Mark has done some work with it, called Schooling by Design. Wiggins McTighe, and they challenge us to think about any organization needs to have a mission. And it has to be generated by the community members within that organization. And so as you do a comparison of school mission statements, you'll see the same sort of key phrases. Participating member of an active community, those kinds of things that you'll see. But the idea of a community, and community being the town community as well as the individuals within the organization, having the opportunity to build that mission. And what Ellen, I think, does a nice job in her next slide is talking about then building your structures around that mission is a really important.
This is what I hear. I hear, how are we trying to be different, instead of what I wanna see is how are we trying to be the same?
I mean, I hope that we're gonna be able to address that. I can't speak to why every school has a different mission statement. I would agree with you to a certain degree, other than participating in those activities. They're a pretty valuable activity to be able to come together around shared values. I think what you'll see, despite changes in words here, that Ellen and I realize as we're working together, as you said, what's the similarities and differences, whether we chose to capture those within the mission statement.
Yes,
I just want to clarify, we have 3 schools in Essex Town School District and 1 mission. So what I thought I was understanding in your question is not what's different between the 2 districts, but why within 1 district would there be different mission statements? Is that what I was understanding the
Why
question to
shouldn't
be?
all schools everywhere, or at least in
seeking
our
to be
society,
similar?
have the same mission statement, you know, to educate people, blah, 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 whatever it is, why are they different? And I always see these signs in the schools and go, why do you need a mission statement? Don't people know why they're here? It seems silly to me.
It's kind of the bumper sticker, you know what I mean? It's the one you kind of stand behind and you want it to be something that you remember and you can say without having to read it kind of thing. You want to get it right out there.
It's like saying the forecast in Vermont in January is chance of snow.
Right.
I haven't figured that out.
Yeah. I'm going to move on, if it's
Yes.
okay. Is that all right? I put together a little slide, and it's just, there are keywords for me to kind of remember what I wanted to share with you. As I said before, our mission is directly connected to our ends policies. And so as a policy governance board, we really my role responds to these 4 policies. And so I put them in very much shorthand language, as other people can tell. But the first thing is that you're absolutely right. I have to make sure that my work is helping our learners gain knowledge, skills, and attributes that make them successful in a rapidly changing world. So that first one is sort of that big overarching. It's about the climate, it's about the culture, it's about the curriculum, it's all of it. And so what we do periodically throughout the year is we report back on our progress with that and how we're doing. The second one says it's not okay to just feel good about what you do. You actually have to learn something. So this idea of being, having prowess in your academic areas, the idea that your core subject areas matter, but also they matter within the frame of a 21st century environment. So your health literacy, your civic literacy, financial literacy, all of our key core academic areas, math, social studies, science, are taught through that lens. So that's, again, something else that we report out on at the board level. And then the last 2 are sort of what the Vermont AOE is now really calling, they kind of term it transferable skills. These are the skills you want everybody to have, no matter what they're doing or what they're studying. So this idea of creativity and innovation, being able to lead others, taking responsibility for my work. They're the habits of learning. So those make up our 4 ends policies. And so if you think about it, then the work that I lead in the district is about how do I enact that learning or that learning package for the students in Essex Town. And we have 1,250 students pre-K to 8. So the first one is bringing the vision to reality was kind of my key phrase. To me, that's connecting the dots. So I have leadership, I have administration, I have teachers, I have students. And so what we want is everybody to be on the same page, to be of like mind about how we feel about how students learn. So one of our pieces, and it shows up in CCSU's mission statement too, is we want a student-centered learning environment. So that's something we're working at. So part of that means that part of my work is making sure that the leadership team understands that the teachers have the skills and attributes they need to do that we have supports, as in coaches and other people, to kind of help move things forward. You all know that we're all of us, engaged in a complete turnover of curriculum. In other words, we're moving and aligning to the Common Core. So there's a lot of new language and a lot of new work. So trying to figure out how to keep that vision going is really important for us. We kind of summed it up in our district with the work that we did around professional learning community development. PLCs is what you'll see it written as. And so DeFore kind of makes us think about the fact, what is it we want our kids to learn? What do we do if they don't get it? What if we do if they already know it? So we keep those questions foremost about the learning of our kids, and it's about all kids. So again, mission to vision to the ends policies, I think, goes through. And in the work we've been doing in the last few years, there's been changes by design. So my role, I am in charge of the infrastructure of technology as well as integration of technology. That was on purpose. So when I first came to the district, there were 2 individuals in each of those, there was an individual in each of those roles, which equals 2. And at the time, Jim Fitzpatrick was superintendent. He was very much wanted us to be a cutting edge 21st century school, technology and peace, and he wanted technology to be part of the instructional package. So our work went that way. So that change in department, so to speak, was on purpose to kind of get us into that door. Other things that we did, we have a changing populations, both of us do. I think Amy would talk about that as well. We've bumped up some of our student management services in the building to care for some of the emotional package that comes with some of our students at this point. And so again, it's always looking at all of our students and trying to get ourselves to that successfulness for everybody, I guess. And then the last part, I won't spend any time on it, is just that as we do that work, we identify places that we need help or we need to firm up or put more in. Instructional coaches is something in the last 2 years that with the changes in math and language arts, it became almost impossible to figure out how we could impact every classroom without someone sort of in the ranks sitting beside rather than standing in front. So again, that whole idea of instructional coaching becomes a really important one. So we take it all together, and that becomes part of the work I do. So that's the curriculum, that's holding things together. Instructional practices, which comes out in that latter part too, as far as the infrastructures go, and also assessment. So assessment is what really binds us together. By collecting and understanding where our students are at any time, then I can be sure that I can assure my board and my teachers and my students and my kids that they're learning. So I think that's really an important part. So I just want to round and round, but anyway.
Great.
Sure. Here.
No.
Okay,
Good
I
look
got
at
it.
And I'll be brief. You know, when Ellen and I talked about having a moment to tell the story of our districts or supervisory union, there's no one slide that would tell the story of either one. But I'm choosing to speak, I think, about our educational leadership team. Our educational leadership team is made up of all of the, school-based leaders in central office, and we meet quite often, actually. As a large group in the summer, all of the assistant directors join us, but at least once a month, the entire leadership team meets. And I point that out because as a supervisory union, it's very important to collaborate across a system, but also to be able to value the individuality and the uniqueness of each of the buildings, which is why we have a centralized mission statement, a centralized improvement plan, but we also have individual improvement plans, or I should say action plans, and individual missions, because we value both. We value the size and the scope and the benefits of being able to work together in a larger system, but we don't want to lose sight of the individuality. So our leadership group, you'll hear me say ELT, is our educational leadership team, and we have a part of our website that's devoted to that. And this statement has been the one that's been, driving our work. Our action plans, if you look at our current school action plans, are, as I said, organized around 2 areas, student learning and achievement, and the second is safe and healthy and respectful schools. But again, equity is sort of this piece that we're constantly kind of grappling with a little bit. Most recently, we've engaged in a lot of work as an educational leadership team in trying to understand a national framework called, and I apologize for the acronym, we're so guilty of it in education, and I hope you hold us accountable to making sure you catch us on
I'm
this.
writing all of them down.
I know, when I heard that Ben had to make a glossary, I said, oh, what did I do? It's called Multi-Tier Systems of Supports. It's actually something that Vermont has embraced as a state. You'll see it in the Vermont Education Quality Standards in that language. And it's built around a pretty common sense framework of 5 things that any system should have regardless of its size. we've taken these 5 things and we've spent over a year really engaged in understanding what this means. What does it mean from a strong system, and being able to take those components and evaluate each of our schools and our supervisory union against this. Last night, a couple of us sat here at a board meeting and heard from our student services director, Erin McGuire, who reported out on our year-end evaluation of how we're doing against these 5 pieces. And again, each of our schools kind of weighed in on how they were doing, but it was important for us to try to figure out how are we doing together and then how are we doing separately. So they are a strong system of support, effective collaboration, high-quality instruction and intervention, a comprehensive assessment system, and well-designed professional development. And the national framework challenges us to say that any good school system, regardless of size or scope, needs to have strength in all 5 of these areas. And where there are holes, that's where we have potential to lose children or not challenge children or just have those kind of organizational breakdowns. So we've committed to this to the point where we're redesigning our action plans to include these 5 elements because we feel like they're incredibly important inputs for us to keep an eye on. And Ellen and I, when we talked, said we could keep on talking, but
Yeah.
we've agreed that we're going to monitor ourselves on this one and give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you want.
Yeah. So why don't we jump into some questions, and why don't we start with folks as you look through the slides that were provided. Do you have any questions about the information that was presented, the data, some of the things that came to mind? Would be great to take advantage of having these 2 experts here tonight to engage in this discussion. So, who'd like to start?
The sun is right in your eyes, Marla.
I know, I'm
Lean
having
back
trouble
and ask the
seeing
question.
people. I have a question. When I was looking over the report, I was starting to wonder if I was missing pages, because what you've got in here for assessments are only 8th and 11th grades. Are we not going to be including, I'm thinking of our final report, I would think we would want the lower grades assessments too.
We can provide you with any data that you want. The specific question that was given to us through Brian's leadership was to focus on, I can't remember how it's phrased, but equitable sort of entry into the same high school. So towards answering that question, we focused on exit 8th grade kind of data and a snapshot of that. And then looked at 11th grade data. I was able to grab the 11th grade data and sort it by town of residence. We weren't able to sort it by the exact feeder school that they came from, but at least the town that they resided in. But if you can generate a list of data points, I'm sure we're both willing to bring it
And
back.
the other part we included, I think, in one of the emails were links to our individual web pages. So that information is all on those web pages as well.
How do you monitor collaboration?
That's a great question. We're at the point where we're evaluating ourselves against the sort of standard statements there for each of those 5 areas. And some of it is just the way in which the frequency in which we may talk with each other, the way that we record our decisions and take actions. The ability, again, as I said, and I'm speaking a little bit anecdotally, to be able to honor the individual, but be able to come back and say, what's our accountability together? Today was a great example. We had a meeting looking at potential standards-based reporting software, and there's a desire to have it sort of the way I want it in my building, but then an understanding that parents experience differences when we have inconsistencies across buildings. So it's looking at evidences like that. Where are we intentionally addressing those areas and collaborating? Some of the data that we're using, what's called an MTS as evaluation tool, is perception data. So you're right, we're examining ourselves. It's less quantitative than qualitative.
Will, can I ask something?
Of course, yeah. Of course.
Tell me to shut up if you want.
No, you're good. You're good. Keep going.
It's a
The
great question.
comment I made last time was that there's some people missing in this group. And they're the teachers. We can talk all we want about this business, but teachers are the ones ultimately that affect the children most directly. And I don't know if there are any here except me, and I'm retired.
And I'm a longtime teacher.
Well, you are too. You are too, I know that. But see, you've gone to the other side now.
I know.
You went to the
Yeah.
dark side.
Well, so I have a question along those lines, if I may. You know, when I was thinking about this topic and how it relates to this overarching question that we're sort of wrestling with, I was wondering if both of you could maybe speak for a moment about what would the benefits be of a truly aligned curriculum, a shared curriculum, a shared philosophy around instruction and assessment. What would the benefits be for students? And what would the benefits be for teachers?
I mean, there are benefits, there's no question about that. I think, you know, I have to look at the work we've been doing. I've been in Essex Town for 9 years now, and so the work we've been doing is about that. So we recognize the fact that we stop at grade 8, and could we have that continued conversation? But I also think it gets to the effective collaboration and a lot of other pieces too, and it takes time to get there. So just by having a curriculum document that says we are aligned, that won't be it. There's work to be done to have conversations, because it is about the people and the system kind of coming around. I would say in the last 2 to 3 years in Essex Town, I hear less about individual schools and I hear more about our district. So that to me is like, that's an aha moment that we're now thinking pre-K 8 instead of individually. So absolutely, there would be an amazing piece of wonderfulness, you know, to be able to have that alignment, but it's not just alignment. It really is about how we get people to have the time, because time is part of that, to allow themselves to have that conversation and to get to that point. But I mean, we've talked a little bit about 9th grade teachers, and I know Amy and I talked a little bit, and you can jump in here, but that they don't think of the kids as Essex kids, Westford kids, or EJ kids. They're kids, and they come to them with a certain amount of information. So as our curriculum aligns more through the Common Core, which is affecting us deeply, that conversation will be even tighter. You know, I said that, right?
I think about benefits in terms of consistency for kids would be, you know, a good example is if you move from one classroom to, you say, 3rd grade to 4th grade, and you have a teacher who's using similar instructional materials. There's a natural common language that's used. Let's say it's a math materials. We most recently are looking at adopting a new math program, and in the last 2 years have really moved to a common writing program, and that's the feedback that we're getting from parents and from students, that they're starting to hear the same language. Students see things in similar ways, so it's a little bit less of reorientation every time. We did talk about the high school. I mean, the high school, obviously, and we did, I guess to your point, talk about bringing teachers. We weren't quite sure of the venue and whether that was ours to invite, but certainly having spent time with the teachers in this building at the high school who receive students from, you know, multiple districts, the majority of the students sitting in 9th grade come from Essex Town. The second largest group is from Essex Junction, and so they don't speak to the kids as if they're from 2 different towns, but they always have to plan for any child who comes through the door. We're a choice high school. We have students who come from Georgia. So they'll, regardless of the outcome of this group, we'll never be at a point where we can, as a 9th grade teacher, expect absolute commonality coming in. It just doesn't work that way in education. However, our teachers have more and more worked more closely together. We've discovered that we have somewhat accidentally, somewhat not so accidentally, adopted very similar instructional programs. And what we see both in kids, well, I would say we see in teachers, I'd have to ask the teachers how much they see it in terms of kids, just that common language around common assessments we've been using, common instructional materials, allows you to get deeper into the conversation a little bit more quickly. So I do see a benefit for both teachers and students when there's that kind of consistency as it moves forward. Can we function without it? We have been. The technical center, they have students from 9 different feeder schools. It's quite a challenge for them. When a student comes in with an algebra from one school and an algebra from another, there's a great deal of time trying to understand what does it mean in that school. Essex High School is not challenged quite so much in that way because we have this opportunity to talk and share information, and our teachers are up here often reaching out to Essex middle school teachers as well as ADL. But I do have to believe that an opportunity to have more consistency would be good for kids and good for teachers.
Why don't we go to Kathy next?
Yeah, just you know, on the heels of this, thinking about the Common Core, are you both in Westford as well in a very similar place with your, working with the Common Core and that being with the teachers? I mean, are you in a place where not only that change is being made, but then if we make this change, we're all somewhat in the same spot in the road?
We're doing probably what you would call parallel play. So our curriculum frameworks are in their second year of implementation. That doesn't mean we've got it all figured out, but it does mean that we have, we've established the non-negotiables for English, language arts, and mathematics, and we've also implemented the Next Gen Science standards. And I know Amy's doing the same work along the way too. Are our non-negotiables exactly the same? They may or may not be. Do you know what I mean? But I think when you look at the standards, the way they're written, it's pretty hard not to come up with very similar kinds of expectations for your kids as far as that goes. So the part that we mightily have in common is that we are aligning to the same common set of standards and the Next Gen Science standards as well. So those become our backbone, and then what we do in the classroom is fitting onto that.
I would agree, and anyone who's, I don't know why you would spend time reading these standards, but if you did read these standards, they're much tighter than what we've experienced in the past. So the Math Common Core, Literacy Common Core, and Next Gen Science standards are much, there's less negotiation, I think, within them. In that they are a set of common standards, but not the only thing that happens in a classroom. So when you build curriculum based on a tight set of standards, you arrive in similar places, but still, as I said earlier, honor the individual teacher moving towards it. I think I would venture a guess that other areas that were built upon larger sets of standards, and I'll just use social studies as an example. We have Vermont social studies standards that are quite enormous. You'd probably see much more differences, but anytime you're moving towards a tighter set, there's naturally going to be that. But in terms of timeline, we're all following the same state timeline.
Yeah.
I would say we're in the same place.
Around the same.
Yes.
Thank you.
Adam, did you have a question?
Yeah, Ellen, you said that the teachers in the high school don't necessarily see kids as town residents or Junction residents or Westford residents when they come to the high school. Do they see any differences, either anecdotally or in the data from where they came from?
And she was paraphrasing me in
I
that
was, yes.
conversation. Because as a curriculum director who's been here, this is my 4th year, it was a natural question that I asked. I was curriculum director at Chittenden South for feeder districts, or 5 feeder districts moving into one high school. It's different here in that we have many more students who are coming in from outside our supervisory union, so it's a question that's naturally asked at a high school level. And the answer was the same at CVU as it was at Essex High School. We don't choose to view kids in a divisive way. We don't choose to pose those questions in that way. We do view them as a single community, and they'd like to sort of contain that. And then I push harder and say, no, really. And they've assured me that, again, they plan for every child who comes through the door, and they have not been able to identify there's something in play here that feels different over here from a curriculum or program point of view.
Yes, Mark.
So following up on that, it's been a long time since my children were in high school, but I remember them clearly coming home and saying, well, we had to relearn this because the kids at ADL didn't get that. Or, the kids at Essex Town have already had this, but the kids in Westford and ADL haven't. So we're spending time on things that some kids know and some kids don't know. I don't know how much of that there is now. I suspect that Common Core is going to make a difference. But one thing I've always felt about unifying is that a lot of the collaboration right now depends on the people in the jobs, and the leadership in the 2 districts. And I'd just like you to comment, but for me, it would be different because it would be one system. And it wouldn't be dependent on particular people in particular positions.
And I agree, and I hope that you heard that in my answer. I think that any time that there's natural or unnatural ways for people to be able to collaborate, those things will occur. We don't currently have formal systems for that occur. It is dependent on us calling that together, and there are many things that pull us in our individual directions that sometimes make that happen, and sometimes they don't. Our teachers most recently attended a training over here and around a math assessment. It worked at that moment. Other times it doesn't because we're not part of the same system. I do have to believe that while it's unfortunate, I think that your students would have come, or your children would have come home and said that, I think that there's no guarantee that that dynamic would ever change, because kids come from so many different places. The flip side of that is the teacher who would say, I know I taught it, why are they not remembering that they did it the next year? But I do believe that there's opportunity here for us to tighten that up, particularly at the 2 middle levels, and I know that that's something that Lori and Kevin have spent time talking about as well. Did you want to?
No, you're good.
I can't see who, oh, yes, go ahead. Kim.
Common Core, I know I have not read all the standards, and I'm not going to. It's really crazy if you look on it on the web, but regardless. So the Common Core, just to get in my own mind, the Common Core standards that are going to be standardized, and it's supposed to be for all states that are Common Core, they're adopting this, would be, what is it, science, math, is it language, is that?
It's, the Common Core state standards are English language arts and then mathematics. And it also includes, within the English language arts, a set of content literacy skills, which is really about reading within your content area, but it's not about social studies and it's not about science.
Okay,
A year after those were created, the Next Gen Science standards were created by a different group. And those have been adopted as well, but they're a year behind the English language arts and mathematics. So you hear Common Core and you will hear Next Gen. And soon you'll hear C3.
Next gen is next generation.
Yeah.
It's probably pretty important to know that at the federal level, anyone can be enticed to write a set of standards. Standard adoption happens at the state level.
Right.
So the 44 states that chose to adopt Common Core state standards are implementing them. The 23, I've lost track of the number of states who chose to adopt the national Next Gen Science standards have made those their state standards.
And the other
Does
part
that make sense?
to know is that these weren't developed by the Federal Agency of Education. It was by the chief state officers through the governors, was where it came up that we needed a common set of standards because our population is much more mobile than it has been in the past. And so they were trying to address the issue of mobility.
So, yeah, just so I can get this clear in my head. So if in 8th grade they're learning algebra, so algebra should be taught the same in all places? Is that, I mean, should it be the same?
Yeah.
Isn't that what the Common Core is so that the levels?
It will help with that, but it's also changing some practices. So algebra is actually taught from kindergarten through 8th grade. And so as a standalone class, that's generally been a high school class brought down to the 8th grade. So in 8th grade, they are experiencing algebra, and some are taking it as a separate class as well.
But would they be
But
learning
that
the
would not.
same algebra in Vermont and California? I mean, isn't that what Common Core is
Theoretically, in that
supposed
the
to be?
standards have been situated in the same place, that the same standards that you would see in 8th grade in California would be the same standards that you would see here.
That's
Maybe different textbooks, and maybe a different approach. With 44 states adopting Common Core, it definitely has invited larger vendors to come forward and produce materials. That's been nice because our standards were 3 states. There's no vendor in Texas that was going to make, materials driven, specifically for Vermont. So that's been an interesting opportunity and a little bit of a burden also to sort of go through all of these large vendors that are aligned to Common Core standards. But I like to think of it as an opportunity.
Just a process observation. It was a Common Core that I was thinking of when you mentioned it, and you mentioned it again. We seem to, lost my train of thought here. Lost it. I'll come back to
It'll
it.
come back.
I feel that we have gone kind of in a circle. Like, I don't feel like we have an answer. Are we gonna be all committed to the same Common Core standards? Or are we going to have flexibility within the different schools with this Common Core? It is a yes or a no more than well, you know, we're gonna try, it's gonna take time, type of thing. Like, I feel that we need a yes or a no.
We are all committed to the Common Core. I mean, our state has adopted it, the state board has said that's what we need to do, and that's the work we're doing. I think what we're trying to say to you is that while the standards are the standards, they may look different in practice by teacher to teacher, but the outcomes you want are the same,
Yes,
okay?
I do
So you don't want cookie cutter teachers, you want teachers that bring passion into the classroom. But when we assess, we're looking at the same core ideas from those standards. So it's going to be the assessments that help shape how everything kind of comes together. Our local assessment plans, but also the state assessments.
I think the transition language you may hear from us, if you can understand that if we are handed a set of K through 12 standards, the students who are sitting in that 5th grade seat have not had those 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade standards. So each of our teachers, while we moved into adoption of these within the 2 years that we were given, they're receiving students who may not have exhibited the 4th grade standards yet. So there's a great deal of transition that's going on. Middle school math is a great example of that.
Huge.
Really ratcheted up in math, and it's really caused us to have to think about how do we address the needs of these kids who haven't had the same sort of linear readiness for it in some way, and our high school's grappling with that as well. And I don't know if that answered your question or not. If you heard wishy-washy, it's because it's a pretty complex
it's-
task to transition your
I
standards.
mean, all these children are coming from the majority of them have been in the same system for a while. So whenever you've all started, whenever you've adopted the Common Core, that's when they began. So whether they were in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, it really wouldn't change, would it?
Well, what Amy's alluding to is the fact that at certain grade levels, whole chunks of content moved. So if you have in 6th grade or 5th grade was teaching probability and statistics, that's no longer a 5th grade math content piece. That moves to 6th grade. But 6th grade doesn't know if, you know, so it's trying to find the solid ground for all of the kids. 2 years ago, I think, it was the kindergarten class that we discovered would be the first class that never had to take NECAP. So they would be the pure SBAC kiddos, because they started with SBAC and they're going all the way through.
NECAP and SBAC, could you just do?
Sure, SBAC is Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, and that is the test that we give. It's actually, the assessment window is open now.
Our new
There
state
are
test.
2 consortiums across the nation. One is PARC. I can't do that one. That's the other one. But I can probably do it if I think about it long enough. But anyway, we're in Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. What's the other
The
one?
NECAP.
NECAP was the New
Was our
England
old
Common Assessment
assessment.
Program, which was our before SBAC.
When did that change?
It's just
This
this
is our
year is the
first year of
With
administration of
SBAC.
SBAC. We've had the standards upon which this assessment was built for the last 2
2
years. And if it helps at all, I was thinking the other day when I was driving in, and I think I've done my math on this one correctly, because I've been doing this for a long time. I've been through several sets of state standards and assessments that I believe our kneecap kiddos, for better phrase, never made it the full 12 years. In other words, they started with a set of standards and we never actually got them to adulthood before we had a shift in standards and assessment. And that speaks to maybe what you're hearing in terms of the complexity of those transitions.
Yeah. I have another question. So how long do you figure, if we do implement this merge, how long before we could see the same curriculum throughout the districts? How long do you figure?
I mean, I think immediately
It's a
you're gonna see-
conversation.
You're going to see you're going to see math, science, and literacy faster because we have these new standards. We're already in the process of sort of educating ourselves around that and making those changes. And with every curriculum that you build, and I guess it's important to think about, we're handed state standards. We build curriculum based on standards. So if you're talking about curriculum from a unit, what unit that 3rd grade teacher's doing, they're not in common, but the standards are the same. I would venture a guess that those 3 areas would be the first areas that we can come up quite quickly on.
Yep.
The harder ones are the ones, as I said before, social studies. You've got Civil War going on in 4th grade in one grade in a building, and you've got, I can't even imagine, something else in another one. There would take some time for us to be able to work that together so that there was commonality. But again, we have to be careful when we make those choices about to what point. Having teachers point to the same standards, but get to it differently is not always a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanna get back to,
come from 3 different districts. This is my 3rd district,
Mm.
that all have had the Common Core. So I do get that aspect of it. The other question, so you don't know exactly when this would all be implemented, and would the statement still remain the same throughout each school, or will we all have one statement if there's a merge?
What do you mean by statement?
You know, the mission statement.
Oh, gosh, I think you're asking things above our pay
Yeah, I
grade
don't
in
think
terms of
that-
the way an organization would.
That would
Don't
be-
look at me, I'm looking at Mark.
Well,
Because
I'm
that
just
is
because-
that is a leadership position that's, we're a part of, but we're not necessarily in charge of.
Okay.
I would say that Ellen is quite skilled at curriculum leadership, and I would say, I'd like to think that I am as well. Our teachers work really well together within your system,
Yep.
within my system, and I'm confident they would work well together.
Right.
One of our challenges, if we wanted to just hand curriculum to teachers, we could do it tomorrow.
Right.
Teachers developing curriculum, that does take time. And what we often grapple with is it takes time away from kids teaching. And so when we move through these things slowly, sometimes it's with intentionality. We don't want to empty classrooms to get this work done. And we want to pick our battles, and we don't want to put our teachers through so much change. So our social studies committee decided this year, we're not changing a lot. Why? Because the K-5 teacher just had 3 new sets of standards given their way, and we're looking at a new math program. And the system can only kind of handle that so much. So I wish we could give you a date on that one, but it's that complex. I mean, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I agree totally. I mean, I think to just hand a curriculum to the 2 separate districts as we merge would probably not be the right way to do it. It's that idea of coming to common understanding about what we consider to be most important within those curriculum guidelines. And we've done that work as 2 separate districts. We'd still need to do that work as one. We'd still need to bring both of our sets of information together and say, of this, what do we believe? And what do we think is going to be the best? And that's a collaborative conversation that has to, happen if you want them to come out with the same outcomes.
I wanna get back to Wes, who's been.
I think there are some subjects that are problematic, and not the curriculum, but I think it will be with the public. We're having a hard time understanding curriculum. Listening, not because of you folks, but it's a tough subject. You want to sell it to the public. I'm thinking the other day we talked about busing, and I think we ought to have a parking lot list so that we can have strategies addressed. So when we start to run out of time, we can say, it's nice that we want to talk about this, but remember, this is going to be problematic. If we're going to sell it to people, we've got to be ready to understand it ourselves.
So Wes, just so I'm clear, you're suggesting that as we are having discussions and other ideas come up, we should capture them so that we can get back to them at some point?
Well, like curriculum, I think is an issue that the public's going to want to know all kinds of
Yeah.
answers. They're going to want to know about busing. They
Right.
probably don't care about parking lots, but,
Right.
so we should have the list ready so
Sure.
that if we're running out of time, we can say, look, remember these things? We got to make sure we understand these before we go and ask the public to understand it.
Kim?
Can I just maybe follow up or just ask for clarification on Wes? As a board person who was sort of helping to decide we were going to do the study, while we have a draft agenda, we are not we won't run out of time. We have to answer all the questions, and we have to have thorough information. This just isn't figuring out how we deal with pushbacks or get it all done within a timeline. So I'm hoping that I can say, or just question you, Brendan, to reassure us that we have a draft timeline and we have a draft schedule and a parking lot for concerns or questions or things that we need to come back to with more information, I think is really important. But it wasn't my understanding that there was a deadline for the results of the study, that we have the time to be as thorough and critical in our thinking about what we're recommending.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion is that I think that the work of the committee is so important that we shouldn't rush it for any sort of outside pressure or expectation. I think that we have an opportunity as a group to do this study right, and if that takes a little bit longer than we initially thought, I think that's okay. I think the key thing for us to remember is that what we're trying to do as a committee is to consider the question. Some people around this table may have already made a decision that they think we should go one way or the other. But as a group, we have an opportunity to learn as much as we can together so that we're not so much focused on, at this point, on selling anything in particular, but learning as much as we possibly can. And if that takes 4, 6, 8 weeks, you know, or longer, months, we should take that time to make sure that we do this right. So I think that should be our, you know, our central focus without necessarily putting any dates on it. But I do appreciate the thought that, you know, things are gonna come up, questions are gonna come up that we'll wanna circle back to. And we definitely should capture those as we go along. Mitchell?
What do you see as the problems going forward if we were to combine everything into one organization? Can you take the various curriculums and the various ways you do things and easily combine them, or is there going to be some struggle and pain involved?
And what would be sort of the top challenges of, if you were presented with this opportunity to merge with?
If we merge, we become the largest school district in the state. So that means that there's a lot of individuals who need to have hands-on and eyes-on all of the conversations. To me, that's your biggest charge, is how do you get all the players involved? Because you can just do it, and we could still do what we do, or you know what I mean? But if you really want to merge, if you really want those two things to happen, then how do we design it so that the teachers and the parents and everybody have that time to understand what that means?
Is that doable?
I think so. It's just
Because
it's a much bigger organization.
We're going uncharted waters now if we're going to be the biggest, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I think of it as doable. When I entered at Chittenden South in 2001, Dr. O'Regan was superintendent at the time, each of our K-8 districts had their own curriculum, and they were highly functioning. And it took some time to kind of negotiate some away here and there. It's respecting the culture of the individuals. It's realizing that systems in themselves don't necessarily change things, but that there's got to be a focus on the culture and the honoring of the individuals and the hard work that's gone into it. But I don't think, I do speak for Ellen, neither of us are afraid of that work. When it's good for kids, we're going to get in and we're going to get to work. We're here, I think, to answer questions in a hypothetical. We haven't had a chance to build a timeline for a work plan or something. It would probably be one of the first things we do, would be to sit down and figure out what would that work plan look like, and you know, what would be the highest leverage points first? What would be the biggest change points we'd want to sort of tackle first?
We talked in district a lot, in our leadership team and in our other meetings that we have, about the idea that by maximizing the two districts, you end up with more shared expertise at different levels of the district. So leadership, for one, building principals. There are now 2 at the middle school level that can talk together and have part of that leadership conversation. So there's some real benefits. Having more 3rd grade teachers around the table to kind of figure out how to do this math piece brings more expertise to the table too. So I mean, but it's more people. So you just have to remember, we have 7 3rd grade teachers. You probably have at least that many, almost, yeah. So, I mean, it just
and
makes...
I think the vertical piece as well. You know,
Vertical
we
is
have high
huge.
school representatives on ours, and we have intentional but less sort of formal communication between high school and technical center. So it would provide more of that sort of opportunity, I think.
It seems to me that within CCSU, we already have areas where people in different buildings are doing parallel things, and by examining the processes that they use at Westford and ADL, or Westford and Hiawatha and Summit, to be on the same page, we could see if those are working and how you would integrate that when you're adding another school in the same grade level. So like looking at the data here, it seems that on some things like recent math and recent reading, Westford and ADL are very aligned in the 8th grade, for instance, and so that would suggest that they are doing the same thing. And then it's just a question of, well, is Essex Town doing something better and we want to adopt that, or is the way that the communication is already going on good and we want to...
The hard part with this level of data is that you have to understand that the size of the group matters. So Westford has a very small population. So if that cohort is exceedingly bright, their numbers are going to pop, but it also works in reverse, that their numbers will go down. So we are more alike ADL and EMS because our numbers. So I'm more confident about those two columns. Statistically, the other one bounces. One child can change that whole perception.
But I think you speak about an opportunity, and you use the word
Yeah.
expertise.
Yeah.
Find out what's working well in one of the buildings. Now you have a larger conversation about what could be working well that's transferable across
Across
the
all.
buildings.
So,
Yeah.
I guess what I was trying to say is that there's already expertise about communicating with other buildings. You already know by having like attempting to have parallel curriculum at Westford and ADL, how to attempt to have parallel curriculum in multiple buildings at once.
Because of the supervisory union structure.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Our vertical team has representatives from each of, well, actually, we choose to look at them as buildings, so each of the buildings.
I mean, I
participate.
talk about that level in particular because there's data here, and I personally have subbed in both of those schools. I mean, social studies, so there is a lot of diversity. We do a lot more geography in Westford. But the communication is already happening, and you can examine that and see what's working and what's not working.
Nice.
One of the things I'm thinking about as we get towards the end of this process, I can envision people asking us about curriculum. I have already had one individual say to me, if you're already doing collaboration between the town of Essex and with the supervisory union, why do you need unification? So I think what would help me to be able to help communicate things is if I saw more of your challenges list and your opportunities, and sometimes the challenges can be positive. So I actually need to be able to answer those community people that are asking me those types of questions. And I'm not sure from this that I know the answer to give them. Like, I know you and Ellen get together and you collaborate and you've got teams collaborating. I think it would help me to know specifically all the teams that you've got meeting and what's going on in them. Because I think that would give us a clear picture of how it could work as a larger district. And the only thing I'll say about Summit Street in Hiawatha, from being on the board, the school action plans, and I'm assuming Town of Essex does their school action plans. You don't have to because you've got just one building. Well, you've only got one building with all the grades.
We just don't call it batch, we call it strategic planning.
Well,
It's a different-
yeah, so you've got something that you're guiding by, and so does in our district. So when you've got a K through 3 for Hiawatha and a K through 3 for Summit Street, the action plans, yes, they're individual, the principals, the culture of that school, but they still have some factors that are driving their results and what we expect from them. So.
I don't know if you wanted us to answer any of that, or, I
I-
guess the point I want to go back to is, I think you said you needed more detail, and I need to hear more about what detail you need.
What I'm thinking of is, where are you collaborating now? How have you collaborated in the past? How has it worked, being two separate districts? Then, if you look at it as a merged, what would make it, would it be easier? Would it be harder? You know, some things like that to give guidance.
Would it be helpful if we hear how we individually sort of have our structures in place around curriculum development, so that you could hear where some of those opportunities are?
I don't know.
I want to make sure I answer your question, and I'm not sure if I understand it.
I think I want to know where you're collaborating now.
Where Essex Town and Chittenden Central are.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to go back and do what I just said I was going to do, just because I can't sort of start the sentence without saying it. So we have what are called vertical teams. The work that's designed for them has to do with the urgency that's in front of us. So right now we have 4 vertical teams: social studies, science, math, and language arts. Obviously 3 of them have new standards. I happen to know that similar work's going, and we pass work back and forth. But because it's our supervisory union, this is a structure we've built. We've had it historically in place. We know that there's a new set of art standards coming out. Our art teachers have begun to meet, and they've reached out to the art teachers here. But the reality from a systemic point of view is if they're sitting at the table here, unless we're both here with them and authorizing it, they are not sort of empowered to build common curriculum. So it requires us to be able to be intentional about that. What we do, because we haven't always built that kind of that intentionality, in large part because we don't have the mechanisms to do it, is we share our documents back and forth. So at every science meeting, when I'm starting a sort of new year, I pull up the Essex Town Science curriculum and we take a look at it, and we look at it from our lens with that work. What are the pieces that sort of work for us? If we were to do it, we'd have to build new mechanisms. We'd build off of the existing mechanisms.
Right.
We'd have to, I guess the way I think of it is it's a blended family. There's new habits, there's behaviors, there's language that we would have to grow accustomed to. Doesn't mean we can't do it, but we'd have to sort of rethink those mechanisms. I don't know if I answered your question. Specific things that we've done together?
We also, we're part of a regional curriculum coordinators group. So regionally, we work together. So it isn't just that we work together, we're actually working together on implementation of the Common Core. We attend regional meetings. So there's a lot of work that happens at sort of that level, which then filters down. So Amy and I may be at a meeting where they're discussing how they're going to do standards-based reporting. We leave that meeting with similar information, and we head back
email
into
each other
town.
our comments.
And then we talk back and forth. If we have a question about the Consolidated Federal Grants, CFG, then I will call Amy or write to Amy or Gwen or other people in that group so that we have a common understanding, or any questions we have we can get to. We've got a pretty nifty network of curriculum leaders in this region. We really do. Smart.
One of my observations, and this is partially from my time as a board member, is that my observation is that there's a lot of goodwill between the districts. But at the end of the day, I think it's a question of accountability. I mean, neither of you, and this goes for other areas too, are really held accountable for collaboration.
Right.
So until that becomes a reality, it always, in my view, it always sort of takes a back seat to whatever the issue of the moment is.
And I think it's systemic. If you were to go into a Westford classroom right now, you would see Lucy Calkins' primary units of study. If you walk into any of the Essex Junction schools, you'd see the same thing. Because our vertical team had that conversation, they were systemically linked in that way. Accidentally, you might see it in Essex Town because it's a good resource. But because we don't have those systems, and as you say, that sense of accountability.
Or by design.
It's not that we don't want to collaborate. Right. Or it may be that math was the thing that Essex needed to take on that year, whereas we really needed to focus on science. Because we don't have those natural mechanisms, they wouldn't occur.
And I think
Does
the
that make
hard
sense?
part to understand, and I know curriculum apparently is like a foreign language, but we're running as fast and as hard as we can with new sets of the national curriculums there, trying to doing it for our kids, to try to get everything. So this idea of stopping, taking a break, let's go get coffee or whatnot, there isn't a lot of time for that when you're trying to change instructional practices and the things that teachers have used to support their teaching. The last 3 years have been pretty fast.
Great example, I know Essex Town has been doing a considerable amount of work with a consultant named Liz Mira around science. I've seen copies of it. A year later, we found out how great she was. We brought her over our way. Our teams didn't sit together to build it, but we capitalized on that. We've been doing a math material search at the K-5 level across our supervisory union. That material we've shared. But there are moments within an organization that you have to decide which hill you're going to die on. They've come out further on science. We're heading out a little bit further, say, on this math material search. We're both moving in that direction, but as an organization, we've had to make choices. If we were the same organization, we'd have to negotiate those pieces together. That make sense?
May I just ask just kind of a point blank question? I'm listening to all this, and it seems like we're aligning pretty well. I mean, you're working really well together. Congratulations. I think it's fantastic. But may I just ask the point blank question, if we were aligning so well and we're getting to that point and it seems like everything, in your opinion, why merge?
I mean, I can answer, but I will say that my perspective is, I'm sitting in this room, and so I spend a lot of time up at the high school. And so for me, the reason's right in front of me, that this is a place that we share as a common community. I'd like to be able to see the students experience that within a K-12 environment fully. And I know that with all the collaboration that we do between the teachers and between ourselves, our rec departments do a fabulous job of collaborating with each other. The ELL teachers at Essex Town come to our meetings. We share the responsibility of their grant. There's a lot of those opportunities. I'd like to see it expand upon that. I'd like to see that opportunity increase. I'd love to see us with a larger scale be able to think about, could there be magnet teams? Could there be an opportunity for more sort of choice and movement? I would say on a weekly basis, someone's standing on our doorstep and they've accidentally landed at our central office and they really need to be in Essex Town, and I'm sure the same thing happens. I know we've had families move accidentally across the districts and then we have to move their schools. So I think about, while all of those things may not occur, there's opportunity to do those things if we were within one governance structure. There's opportunity for us to do that curriculum. Could we do it without those things? Yes, it's challenging. Systemically not natural. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think
That was probably not a short answer either.
It was really good because it clarified, because I guess people have been asking what are the benefits and what are the negatives, and I think right there you just said what the benefit would be, and that's, I think, what I was looking for personally, but I thank you.
And to be fair, I think Ellen, there are pros and cons to size.
There are.
Oh, absolutely, and there's pros
More
and
people at
cons.
the table, more expertise.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I guess not to necessarily challenge that, but I know before you were talking about how you would kind of use each other's resources, not necessarily intentionally. You talked about math and science. I think if the merge happened and then you were thinking with one mindset, do you think you would lose out on kind of what you guys were passing back and forth before?
Oh,
That's a
okay.
question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Lose out on what?
Not necessarily lose out, but
It's
I
about
guess
having
lose the
less
resource.
expertise
Right.
to
You would be
problem solve
thinking,
through. Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, there would be one person sitting here, and so we wouldn't be debating back and forth that piece, so you lose that part of it.
I guess I can't predict what the system would look like, so
Yeah.
it's hard for me to answer that. Were we
Right.
one
I guess-
supervisory union, would there be 3 of us, 4 of us, 1 of
Yeah.
us? That's not sort of ours to decide.
Right.
So it's harder to answer that. But I will say, I would reiterate, we have a very tight group up in the northern part of the state of curriculum coordinators who support each other, and we are constantly sharing information because we are all moving as fast as we can with changes in standards. And I'd like to think that same thing would occur.
Gary, did you have a question?
Actually, one, I don't necessarily agree with the statement that there, we talk about collaboration, but I think I also heard that you invited a consultant in, and then you heard about it, and you invited that consultant in a year later. So I see we paid the same consultant twice to probably do very similar things. I don't see that as collaboration. I see that quite the opposite. I think collaboration would have been the two of you getting together and saying, let's get a consultant in, let's get everybody together and pay them once. So just that. But I also wanted to kind of make another comment. I'd like to hear from you a little bit your thoughts about consolidation, pros and cons. Looking at a higher level, I know there's a lot going on now with the new curriculum changes and so forth, but in my mind, and I hope this is true, you're always looking for generally how do we improve the quality of education. And I looked at this NAEP result is online here, and it compares 2003 to 2011. I assume you're familiar with that
Can
study.
you say what it is again?
NAEP.
NAEP?
NAEP, yeah.
The national assessment?
Yeah, and I know it's for the whole state, but obviously you're an important part of that. So I look and I see Vermont made a very small incremental improvement from 2003 to 2011. I look at some other states, and they were below Vermont in 2003, and they leaped way up above Vermont in 2011. Now, I don't think the demographics changed that much in states like Massachusetts and New Jersey in that time. I may be wrong. So I think they did something to make improvements. How do you learn what that is and take advantage of that? And would being consolidated give you more opportunity, more resource, more time to learn the best of the best
from what other states and what other countries are doing too. I mean, let's face it, we're an international competition here. Our students are not going to just be going up against kids in California. They're going to be going against kids in India, China, across the world, and it's going to be tough. So what are you doing to address that?
You know, I guess this will make me sound like I should pull up a rocking chair. But I began teaching with no standards and no curriculum. I taught in New Hampshire. I worked in 3 schools and was never handed curriculum. I made it up. Our state of New Hampshire was developing standards at the same time that Vermont was developing standards. I became a curriculum director in it's interesting as I sit here and think about it, my first curriculum director job was a single district, 5 towns, 11 schools, 200 square miles. And when I entered in as the first curriculum director, because they were a single district, they had no state standards, but they had pretty tight curriculum. Those teachers, they got it that those kids were going to the same high school, they had natural opportunities to work together, and their curriculum was pretty tight. My second curriculum director job was at Chittenden South Supervisory Union, a very different sort of governance model, but it was 4 K-8 systems, and I'll include a 5th one, a St. George's School Without a School, that came to one high school. Different set of problems, different set of negotiations, but again, it came sort of to a natural place. And now I feel like I'm in a third kind of governance structure that's got a little bit of idiosyncrasies in that the majority of our students coming to our high school are not within our supervisory union. But the other trend that's been happening throughout that career is tighter and tighter curriculum. You talk about NAEP, it's our National Assessment for Educational Progress. It was put in place because all 50 states had 50 sets of standards. They had to put that in place. It's a sampling test. The Fleming students just were chosen this year to be tested, and it provides that comparison from state to state. Well, now we think about Common Core, 44 states using the same set of standards. I guess I have to look at that as an opportunity for all of us to get tighter and tighter. If we were leading the way that we were and didn't have state standards, or even didn't have common state standards, that negotiation would be that much harder. So I just see this as more and more opportunity for us to bring us closer together in common curriculum, say for example, report cards and so forth. I don't know if I answered your question, but it made me take a,
I think the point is...
Was it a good story anyway?
It was a great story. I really liked it, by the way. But the point is, okay, so, you know, it is challenging and you're doing a good job putting curriculum together. But what have these other places done that have made them even better? And how do you find that out? And how do we get that here so our students get better? And is there some advantage if we're consolidated together to make that happen in a stronger manner? That's the real question. Or we'll be better off not to merge because it'll be better, we'll be more competitive if we don't merge. But I don't hear you addressing that.
I mean, the only thing I can lean towards on this one is that the Common Core standards are a new body of standards based on the newest research. And it's international, I mean, it's looking at all of the other developing countries. And it's looking at the learning progressions that kids need to have. One of the major differences with the Common Core to the old standards was the old standards were lined up sort of step by step, the way we thought kids learned it. These standards are based on the research about how kids actually learn mathematics. So there are now learning progressions. So it's a very different piece. The other thing we learned from our international partners are you can't do everything always. So in other words, we were doing a great, the inch deep and a mile wide kind of stuff. The Common Core brought that all back. And so the standards are much more rigorous. They're much deeper. They require a type of assessment that is not rote at all. It's about application and transfer. And so if we hold to those standards, things should start happening in some different ways. And I'm not sure NAEP is the test that will show you that, though. NAEP is a multiple choice. It's a sampling. It's a very basic, it's not a very out-of-the-box assessment to say whether or not kids have critical thinking skills, which is what you're getting at. Will they be able to be flexible and lead their colleagues, collaborate themselves, those kinds of things. But the Common Core standards demand it. So they demand it in ways that are big. They do. So I think that's your turning point right there, that we'll see differences as we move forward, given the amount of time that we put on less and the amount of time we put on transfer and application of knowledge. It's not okay just to know the facts anymore. Google can do it faster.
Mark, did you have something?
I'd like to Belinda's been trying something.
Well, I don't don't really think that my words are deathless, but I'm hearing something here. And I'm reminded of something that happened at Summit Street many years ago when I was teaching there. A teacher went out to summer school and she found a program that she liked. And she brought it back to her classroom. And she tried it and it worked. And she got all excited about it and she started talking about it in the lunchroom and showing other teachers what her kids were doing. And the next thing you knew, everybody in the building was doing it. If you want the districts to be doing the same kinds of things, and if you want to improve the level of learning, then you don't have meetings. You'll get the teachers from a teacher from Summit Street to go to Essex Elementary, and an Essex Elementary teacher to go to Hiawatha and sit in those classrooms and help the teacher there and watch and see what's happening in that classroom. And if there's good stuff there, it's going to get back to that other building faster than you can say Jack Robinson, because teachers, like everybody else, want their work to be effective. So one of the ways that you get these buildings and these schools working together is get the teachers working together. Too often what we do is we do a lot of blah blah jargon and nobody's quite sure what it means, and then everybody goes back home and does what they've been doing. What you want to do is get these teachers together and see what's going on in the districts, and you'll see change and you'll see improvement. I'm positive of it.
Like that.
Mark? Very well said. Actually, I think that's probably one of the greatest factors that affect student learning is teachers sitting by each other looking at student work. And the Nate question here is a hard one to answer. We don't even see as practitioners the results of that. That's a good question for policymakers. Secretary of Education might be able to bear us. Our Nate results from New Jersey, we're not afforded that privilege to look at. And in fact, I don't think it would really be too helpful. I think what's helpful is that authentic data that's generated at the classroom level. I think we get there asking the question, how do we make that merger work? We have to look at things like common calendars. We have to line up our professional development days. We have to be very, very strategic about the limited time that we have as educators to do the work together. So a superintendent of this district would have to direct that work based on the ends policy of the district and based on the resources we have to bear. But I think that's a strategy that Judy and I talked about, but it's just, our moons don't line up. It's just really hard to do that as separate organizations. But those are assets those are opportunities that we could relook at to help better align the work that teachers need to do together. The other thing is just a comment, Brendan, and don't mean to get on a high horse, but we've talked a lot about academics. And when you interview kids, when you interview parents, when you interview business makers or business owners and our colleagues at the university, it's not about academics. It's about kids being able to be good thinkers, problem solvers, resilient, adaptive, flexible, demonstrate social leadership, being able to persevere and have grit through solving problems. That affective part of education is very, very important. And I'm wondering if our curriculum directors can talk about, in addition to the good work you're leading around the academic piece, what about that other social piece? And included in that would be the fine and performing arts and the appreciation for the arts, because there's so many gifted kids in our system, because I think we're doing a great job, pre-K-12, inculcating kids into that way of thinking. But you also have a role in that. I think it'd be important to address that tonight to make sure we have a rounded picture of the curriculum.
Me? I have to think about that, Mark. I think it's in all of our conversations with curriculum. So I think that as we put together our curriculum frameworks, the types of tasks or thinking we're asking kids to do, and again, the Common Core helps me with it in some respects, or helps us with it, because it's not asking for factoids, it's asking for us to do something. And if you're going to do something, it's the so what. And so one of the things that we have in Essex Town is our ends policies sort of force us to look through that lens of civic literacy and other attributes to learning, so that it's not just straight mathematics. It's mathematics being used for financial literacy. How does it work? So it's working with our teachers about getting the types of tasks and activities that show what kids can do with the knowledge they're learning. A tool that we use is our schools are organized into professional learning communities. So on a weekly basis, grade levels and at the middle school, it's content area teachers come together around those tasks from common units that they're teaching, and they look to see how all the classes in 8th grade did around that one task, and then they problem solve to say, how would I do that differently or better? And I would say right now, we're 4 years, I think, into our professional learning community work. And this year, not that all the other years weren't great, but this year, I think the refrain is that we're no longer just doing them, we are PLCs. You listen to the conversation, and they're not afraid to ask, how'd you do that? My kids didn't do so well on that, how'd you do it? And then the types of tasks they're asking for kids to do is really ratcheted up too, but they get at those, what I call transferable skills, the habits of mind. It's harder to put those into a rote, memory-driven task. Do you know what I mean? You can't really show your leadership skills if you've only been asked to, whether it's A or B kind of thing. So I think it's wrapped around everything we do at this point.
I guess I think about, I'm trying to think of some specific examples that come to mind when you were talking, and I looked at the evidence of our district art show, which is, if you have a chance to go, I mean, it's just tremendous, the amount of effort and energy that all of our art educators put together to put this together for kids and the celebration of their work. I think about the STEM Academy here and the AVPA, our Arts and Visual Arts Performance Academy, and the natural sense of community that exists within the mission of each of those. And I think about the advisory system that we put in place at the high school. It's hard to put an advisory system in place in a large high school. It's been a bit of a transition, but being driven by the idea that we wanted to create a sense of community in a high school that feels pretty large to some kids, including my own who attend. And then I guess I think about, I substituted in as a principal when a principal has to be out at times. And so I spent 2 days at Summit Street School, and there's nothing more sort of grounding to be in a building and realize that curriculum's the last thing some people want to talk about on a Friday. When you've got a child running down the hall. And I spent a little bit of time with a child, I won't say her name, but she was an artist, and the art teacher stepped up and said, come spend some time with me. You didn't get a chance to finish that, and we pulled up the video from AVPA, and there were some high school students talking about their sense of community, just kind of being part of this. The high school here, the teachers here use the phrase flexible pathways a lot. We've been trying to figure out multiple flexible pathways. How do we honor individuals and build varied and rigorous curriculum that allows us to be able to give those opportunities to kids, but also, and one of the phrases we use is, you have to eat your vegetables. There's still some things you have to do that are a little bit non-negotiable here. So how do you kind of find that balance? When I think of community, I think about those. I think about the educators trying to provide that balance for kids. So it's not just Common Core every single day or SBAC, but that there's that sense of community. So when those hard things happen, we can endure them. It's built into everything, as Ellen said. We may not always get it right.
Any other questions, comments, feedback? Yes, ma'am.
Amy touched upon something that brought a memory back. Our school board tries to go into the schools and hold a meeting or a tour at least once a year, because it's hard to get away from the board work and go in the schools. And what was great in some of the tours is the art teacher, which I don't know if it's the individual herself, and the technology integration, how they are working the techniques, whatever you call it, techniques. It was fascinating, just fascinating to be there and see these kids, and they had the videos of how the kids did projects, but it took the art teacher to do it with the technology, because it's changed so much when my son was in school. And it's amazing the technology that they use nowadays, and that's just for art. So that reminded me of how the performing arts and things, it does go into the classroom.
And I can't think of a better partner to have that conversation with if you have not visited her art studio in Grand Isle.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
And know that she's
Shameless
also in
pitch.
charge of technology.
Yeah.
And it's really about, you know, we spent more time talking about STEM, but we've shifted that conversation to STEAM.
STEAM.
It's that whole child piece, and I know we're both committed to that.
Our elementary school just held a STEAM day, which is science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And so the entire 350, how many kids? 300 and, over 400 kids were involved in the whole day. And we're looking at, my tech group and I are looking at how we can change that from being a day-long event to being part of our science and math curriculum. And so we just had that conversation this morning. Another thing that you may have noticed in the news, we were just in the news, Essex Middle School came in first for middle schools for the 3D, the Town History 3D printing project, using a very not state-of-the-art 3D printer, which was falling apart and had to be held together several times during the competition. But 3 young men from the middle school really did us proud. And we also have teams of girls doing the Girls Make It, which is the Maker Faire pieces in Burlington. And part of their work is to construct, I just looked at pictures this morning, which are really compelling, but is to construct and program to make things move and robot hands go, that kind of thing. But their charge is to come back to their school and they have to mentor other girls. So it's that whole pitch of getting girls into programming and coding. So coding is the new big piece. We're really behind the scene on what we're doing. We have in place several after-school clubs that we're working with where 2 of my tech individuals teach the class, but it needs to not be after school. It needs to be part of the whole piece. So we're really looking at that from a systemic point of view, is where does that fit best so that we're not behind the eight. Right now, Arkansas is the only state in the United States that requires computer science in the high school. So it's like, really? Has no one been listening to the news? So that's a big driver right now in my mind as far as how do we incorporate it. And that's where having both sides of the role makes it a lot easier for me to have that conversation sometimes.
As I listen to us talk, see,
Yeah.
Mark, you got us started.
Yeah.
And we could keep talking. I keep thinking about opportunity, because we do have the laser printer, you know, in the Fab Lab. I think about the strength that Westford brings with their outdoor environment and the kinds of things that we could build there. I can't stop thinking about the kind of opportunities that we could do were we given that opportunity, that systemic opportunity to provide that. Would it be easy? Do we have to do those things? No. Could we do them as 2 different systems? We could probably do a better job of that. But we don't have those natural mechanisms right now.
I think the other thing you're talking about is that the success of our students is not necessarily on a bar graph. You know, so
Right,
when we think about the metric, and one of the questions, you know, if we look at some comparable data, I would suggest we stay away from empirical data and start telling the stories about what does transfer look like. And just those, by way of example, those are powerful stories that suggest that what we're investing in is working because this is what they're doing in terms of transfer of knowledge. So as we think about a merger, we need to look at the governance structure and identify what are the outcomes that we hold in common based on our core beliefs in our communities. But what does it look like when kids walk across the stage with a diploma or a certificate of completion in 8th grade? And I think that's going to be that's an exciting story to have. And I would guess it includes that, but it includes so much more.
As we talk about Common Core, the thing that has struck me sort of throughout and in the experience of having exposure to the professional learning communities and the work that's been happening over the last few years as a board member, I view those Common Cores as really the definition of the outcomes we're looking for kids, and so that becomes somewhat of a non-negotiable. Kids will get these certain know, understand, and do's at similar times as they pass through the systems, and that's doesn't make Common Core feel like a bad thing to me. It feels like that's an equity issue for all kids, and those outcomes become the non-negotiables. Getting there together becomes the equity piece, because now 3rd grade teachers are sharing common practice, and they may deliver that in their style, but there's no negotiability really around what kids will know when they come out of that unit of study, and they can share ideas and best practice in what I understand about, you know, the work. And we've had the opportunity as a board to see it when those learning communities have come to us, or when our curriculum groups with teacher leaders have come. So we've really had the opportunity to see teachers and their passion and energy around that come to share with us the work they're doing. While I can absolutely appreciate the idea of honoring individuality in each building, the thing that has been transformational for us is this notion of it's the journey of the student, and it's not about an individuality in a building, and that has been hugely transformational in our district, in the idea that our building educational leaders, instructional leaders, our principals are working together. And so as kids are transitioning through our buildings, at certain age-appropriate places, you feel different as a parent around that. But as a parent, you kind of want to feel like it's one whole system, and it's really about my kid no matter where they are. And that has been a huge transformation in our district over the last probably 5 years. And I think that is something that has shown real benefit for kids and families. And I know that we don't have the situation where we have 2 pre-K through 3s, and you guys have that? 3 pre-K through 3s? Oh, I'm sorry, Martha, but 3 pre-K through 3s. And even though within EJ, you've got 2. And so do folks have the opportunity to collaborate so that a 3rd grade experience feels equitable, and we start to get away from the idea that while a teacher's style might be better suited or less well suited for a particular kiddo, it's not going to be that, oh my gosh, I didn't get that teacher, because there'll be an assurance that families feel comfortable that what kids are expected to be able to do, they get. If that's a challenge, or if you can speak to it or how it happens, it might illuminate for us what happens when we become more of that, where we're same grades in different buildings.
Sure. I mean, and again, I guess I'll go back to systemic pieces and intentionality. My first teaching position was in a single K-8 building. When you're in the same building, you're naturally going to see the bulletin boards for the teacher that you normally wouldn't necessarily meet with. The conversations happen much more naturally. When you have breaks in buildings, you have to be much more intentional about that. The 3rd grade teachers in Hiawatha meet at least once a week. 3rd grade teachers in Hiawatha and Summit get together. It takes some organization to pull them together. Can Westford make it down? It's a half an hour drive. How are the roads looking? But the teachers are committed to it. It's the systemic pieces that we have to put in front of them to, one, hold that accountability, but then allow them the opportunity to do it. It's absolutely harder when you have it across multiple buildings, but it can happen. But when the Westford, and it is one, Westford teacher who comes down, there's a different lens that's brought to the table. It's a different set of questions, and that's what we talked about, how exciting it would be to have teachers across 4 buildings in grade 3 talk about their experiences and celebrate their differences, but build upon that in some way. But it takes intentionality.
Great. Yes?
I guess that the way I was feeling was that you guys would tell us, this is what the picture is going to look like if we go this way. This is how it is now, and this is, I personally wanted to see some contrast between where we are and where we could be. And I'm speaking for myself, I don't know. The other thing is, so say that we couldn't do like the 3rd grade teacher, that they all have this meeting once a month and they're all on the same page. But couldn't we have that with our principals? So here's what we're gonna do, and they would have to implement it without, the principal being the person who's gonna give the instructions, or, where we're going for every 3rd grade, every 5th grade, every grade within, the unification of those systems.
You can do that. I mean, the building leadership is really the boots to the ground. So I can talk of Blue Streak, but unless the building principal is really behind that work, I think that's it. But it will never be the same as having the teachers in the room and holding each other accountable to the work. So that's what, for us, our professional learning communities, when they meet, they hold each other accountable. So they're moving forward, and because their kids are right in front of them, it's different. A building principal is looking over everything, and so that intensity of that conversation would be different. It could be a have to, you must, but it's still not the same emotional contact that you want. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the teachers together is where you want it. That's where you're going to affect most change.
Can we go to the first part of your question, I think, because Ellen and I did put some energy into imagining what this could look like.
Yeah.
Please know that as we develop this, I go back to, I think, something that John Alberghini, and I think you're gonna be meeting with him, talked about. These things over in the opportunities don't have to occur, they could occur. They're opportunities for us to do that. We should, I don't know
Yeah,
if
I
it makes
just-
sense to click through any of them, but
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah, I wanted to be clear that you did, I just want to be fair to you, that you did actually outline some of the benefits that you
told us
saw.
not to show the slides.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so in the slides, you can see from professional learning to systemic efficiencies, they did actually list some of what they saw as the benefits or the impact, so. I think it's important
But
to.
I think we did phrase it as opportunities. Could we
Right.
still, if we were the same single district, have different curriculum in all third grade classes? Sure, there's an opportunity to bring it closer together. We could have choice. Do we have to? No. There's a number of opportunities that could occur because we'd be naturally part of one system. I think about kids, if there were a single organization that were thinking about those flexible pathways and trying to see, capitalize upon the wonderful examples that you've used in your building and the opportunities that are here in this building, that kids and families would be able to naturally access those a little bit more if we were part of one system. Would they? Should they? I don't know, but I think of it as an opportunity for more flexibility, more expertise, more movement across the buildings, maybe more shared programming. If there's something that's going on that's great over in the building, over at, say, Founders, build upon that and invite kids to come to that and strengthen something over here and, support that kind of movement. I'm not quite sure if I'm being all that articulate, but the word opportunity came up a lot when we met.
Any other questions or feedback?
Brandon?
Yes.
Yeah, just a couple of observations in turn, and I want to come back to Heidi, your question as well as Sam's comment earlier about, because as I listen, one, I thank Amy and Ellen because I think what you do have, you're very, very fortunate to have people with the knowledge, the talent, and the passion all rolled into one and being able to do this, and it's a complicated topic. But the question that you had raised earlier about, how long would it take? From my perspective, that ultimately is going to be your new school board's responsibility. It's a governance and the accountability issue that Brendan raised. That if curriculum coordination is a priority for a red, then that board needs to say to its leadership, this is what we want done. Amy referenced what Chittenden South had done a few years ago, and as a new superintendent, it was the greatest gift I could have had given to me, that the board said what we want is a coordinated pre-K through 12 curriculum. I didn't have to deliver that message to every school, to every principal or anybody else. Those were the local boards saying, this is what we want for a common experience for our kids all feeding into a high school. So then the issue is timeline, and then it's accountability. And the accountability right now in your structure that you've got is Judy and Mark or whoever's standing, which brings me to Sam's point about do the conversations become less rich if there's only one left standing? And I think that part of what you would be creating, and I do think the staff are trying to be cautious about being overly promotional of this concept of a merger while trying to present information, because a lot of it, Michael Fullen, who's a pretty renowned researcher, would say the one common factor of successful change in schools is relationships improve. And I think we've heard that from both Ellen and Amy tonight in terms of it's the combining of the cultures, but that board governance to establish a system of accountability, say this is what we want for our kids, here's the data that we have that we're working with now. Can we improve upon that, or are our numbers such that we're going to see some fluctuations? And I think some of those NAEP scores that Gary raised earlier, you can see some changes and fluctuations in terms of how states have done dramatic changes, but their starting points were much lower. You're not starting at a low point, to Marla's question about, so how do I go and communicate to the public, because I'm really looking for some nice, neat detail to hang my hat on. It's going to be messy, but I think that part of what's being presented is if you have a board of people that are similar to yourselves, that are making decisions on behalf of a larger community's body of children, I'd look at this group of people and say, you're probably in pretty good shape. And that's what you're going to be doing with this. This is the conversation about what's important and how do you want to best approach it. And given all of that, you still have, so where does the financial elements of this come into play? Where does the transportation, all of those other issues in terms of what will be the priorities and what's going to be the investment of staff to bring about those priorities once those priorities are clear. So part of your task is to kind of rummage through everything and know what the issues are that can help provide guidance to a board to say, these are the issues we talked about, and here are some of the things that we would like to get accomplished. So, and I think it's hard to get all of the answers because it is so, there's so many ifs attached to, well, we can do this if. Mark talked about those structural issues around schedules, that if those aren't aligned, you can align it if you are now part of a single system, better than what you can do now.
Right, I think that it sounds like we're running out of steam, so I think that we'll call this part of the meeting to a close, but I want to thank you both very much for being here and really appreciate you. We'll do a 5-minute break, we'll reconvene, we'll do a little bit of a debrief, and then we'll move into communication and engagement.
All right.
So that was a long and very detailed discussion and somewhat challenging, but what I'd like to do is maybe just take a few minutes to go around and get your feedback about the conversation that we just had with Amy and Ellen, your observations, your excitement, your frustrations. I'd like to kind of hear it all because obviously one of the things that I want to make sure as your chair is that we continue to have presentations and engagements with folks that are productive. So I'd love to just do a quick 5 or 10 minutes of your thoughts about the conversation that we just had. So anybody want to share? Yeah,
well, this is sort of taking a tangent off of it, but in reading the Chittenden East story, one of the things that seemed to come up over and over again and throughout the state is the issue of local control. And I have a hard time understanding what is local control when you've got Common Core and mission statements. I mean, it seems like an elephant in the room that might just be full of hot air. I don't know.
Well, to Wes's point, that might be one of those things that we want to
Parking
make
lot.
sure that we
Yeah.
come back to, because I
Yeah.
think you're right, it is, however you want to define it or whether it's real or not, I think that it really is an issue that will probably come up, especially as we begin to engage with the community. What about local control? I think is a question we've already heard from some folks. That's a great point.
And one other thing, and it's just a little issue, but it might not be. One of the things that I've discovered my grandchildren are learning that I, as a trained teacher, never knew anything about till I got into real estate, was they're learning how they learn, which is invaluable. And I don't know if that's part of the curriculum or not, but I think, and I should have asked them that question, but once you're empowered with that, it's really powerful to be able to say, well, I know I got to do things to learn, or I'm an oral learner, or whatever.
Well, I think that's the point that maybe Mark was trying to get at toward the end there, that outside of the subject areas, it is those other, maybe less tangible things that are really critical. And how do you teach, how do you assess, but I think that's absolutely
But
true.
I mean, if a teacher, every time they got a new class every year, had with the students something about how that student learns, and the student knew that, it would be powerful, I think.
Other thoughts, other comments? Yeah, Martha?
Well, I really appreciated the fact that there was very little presentation and a lot of time for discussion. I think we've been feeling the need to ask some questions, get some thoughts on the table, and I found the discussion stimulating and very helpful.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts or observations? Yeah, sorry.
I feel like both last week hearing from the superintendents and this week hearing from the curriculum heads, they probably have a wealth of details that it doesn't make sense to share here, but that might be really useful to answering the kinds of questions that Marla encountered, questions about like what are the specifics. And in particular, I was thinking, the way that Judy brought things up, that there's some statutory requirements from the state or the federal government about things that have to be done at the district level, where we might prefer to only have to do that once. And if we could get a list of those kind of things, like you have to have 5 audits, or you both have to prepare a report on X, that might be something that seems like it would be streamlined, but then also on the other side, a list of things that would be more complicated. I don't know, maybe transportation. I have a pre-kindergarten kid, so I don't know anything about that, but
That's a great point. I think that one of the things that Brian and I have talked a little bit about is, as we get into these different areas or themes, how deep into the weeds do we go? You know, so to for the benefit of the committee and our central question, you know, how deep into the weeds do we want to get around transportation, for example? You know, if ultimately that will be something that the board, if we move in this direction, that a board would have to sort of figure out. So I think, you know, that's something that I'll ask us all to just continue to be on guard about, is how much, you know, I think there's certainly the macro, we need to understand some of the big macro things, but how micro do we actually need to go as a committee on some of these things? Because we could spend, I mean, we could have spent hours and hours talking about the level of detail that was brought to the table tonight. So I think that's gonna be an ongoing challenge, but
I guess I was just asking for if there's a way to assemble a knowledge base of things that will obviously be more
Yes.
simple
Yes, that's what
versus
I heard.
things that might potentially cause the board more complication.
Right, okay, great.
And if one of those lists is a lot longer than the other, then we might
Sort of a
be
running
able to
list
answer some
of pros and
questions.
cons
Yeah.
of sorts that you're in.
Well,
Anything else before we move on? Kim?
At the end of the conversation, we were talking about sort of accountability to outcomes, and while I don't know that it's necessarily a required article, this idea that we might add or consider an article, because we are currently operating under different governance models, that it doesn't necessarily have to say what model we would go to, but that clarifies the roles and responsibilities and requirements of sort of boards and the work that they do, and superintendents, and, you know, what that work looks like in terms of, you know, reporting out and monitoring accountability for the outcomes that we're looking for kids, and the desire to establish policy and make sure there's a process for accountability. So I'd put roles and responsibilities on our parking lot if we can.
Anything else? Yeah, Marla.
one of the, with what, Keely, is it Keely? Your first name, sorry. With what she said, the challenges, for instance, like transportation, differences between Westford and the town and the junction, I don't think it's so much of how we would handle it, because it would be the new board's responsibility, but I think it's the legal questions answered. Are two districts, if we're in a district where there's two transportation systems that are different, can one remain a walking district? You know, that's the kind of things that I think needs to be in the report, like the choice issue for Westford. I think it's the legal part of those that we need to know, and I'm not sure that we as a committee would be working on that. I think it's the new board that would be working out a lot of those issues over that year.
What our committee might want to do is identify at least what some of those really key points are that a board might ultimately need to, you know, take forward, but we might want to at least have a survey of what those top legal questions or issues might be.
Yes.
Yeah, Sam?
I think, I guess just going off of that, for any of this to actually become tangible, of we need to do that homework in order to inform our community, because those are probably the types of questions they'll have, and if we don't have answers, then I don't see it passing, I guess.
Martha?
So just to expand on that and use the example of transportation, it would be a new board's responsibility to decide who was going to be hired to transport and what requirements would be in the contract, blah, blah, blah. But we need to understand, can two parts of this new district have transportation and a third part not? And I have to admit, I don't know what the state laws are about transportation. But I grew up in a town where if you lived more than a mile from the school building, you got transported. But I just think we need to understand, what would this new school board, what are the parameters within which they would have to make decisions?
And I think that one of the things that Brian and I have talked about is having Chris Leopold back, maybe for a special session on some of these key legal questions, to work those through with him.
Good.
So I think that's something we'll want to
Yeah,
talk
one
about.
of the things we've talked about is kind of keeping track from a cumulative standpoint and having Chris be a segment of the program one night rather than spontaneously responding one at a time. So, and partly he was here tonight, we had talked about having more time on the choice discussion, because that will be one, transportation, board policy and board roles and responsibilities, better understanding that. The issue is what's the best time to do that as we go forward, knowing what we've got on the agenda for the next 2 meetings anyway.
So, yeah.
I forgot to mention this. I think it's very important for the committee to know. The Prudential Committee meets with our village trustees once a year per our legal agreement. And we talked about the RED study the other night, just last week. And they left it that what we need from them, like for the Essex Junction Rec Department, to bring to them when we need their help or how they can handle things or help us.
Great.
So it's nice that they're kind of sitting back and waiting until we need to talk to them.
Nice to know the offer stands.
Yeah.
I thought tonight's discussion was just outstanding. I thought that was the kind of thing we need to do. And it occurred to me that we need to guard ourselves, because some of these subjects are, I believe, are really going to take us a lot longer to get to any usable, workable, conclusions. And one of the things I think we should fear is the calendar. If it appears as though, well, we got to get past this because, we only have, well, the hell with it. We'll have as long as we need. And I just think it's very worthwhile to keep that in mind.
Great. Yeah, I think it would be great if we operated under the timetable that we establish or the timetable that we're held to is the one we establish.
Got it.
So, Kim?
On the idea of the legal questions, if not at the time the financial folks come, if we don't have those that might have price tags on them accumulated at that point, then we might have them back, because something around transportation, having just gotten our new bid and settled on that in our district, would cost a lot more if we were expanding transportation than a few audits. And so I think if these have price tags, we will want that information, and if it's not the right time, that it come when the financial folks join us. If we find that there's certain legal requirements and you can draw boundaries, but you can't offer part of it to have it and part of it not, or you pick a mileage, or whatever it is, I think we'll get our legal guidance, but then we will need numbers, because our community is going to want to have evidence of whatever we recommend or don't.
Brian said something earlier, and I think he was referring to some of the things that I had mentioned, of not having a bias or when they make their presentation. But I still feel that I would have liked to have what it looks like now and what it could look like. Even with financial, like, this is what we look like and this is what we could look like if we did the merge. I think that we need, like, without, conveying which way you're going, I think we need those two to make a decision. Those two differences. Even tonight, I feel like, I wanted to hear, like, I can't wait to do this. This is so, like, this is the way to go. Like, something, I don't know, or not, Because they're the ones that know,
Right, but I agree with you to a certain point. I think that, for a lot of this, though, it is uncharted territory. So they might honestly not know what it would look like. I mean, I think they shared with us some of the opportunities that they saw in some of the areas like professional services and system efficiencies. But even for them, it might be an uncomfortable position for them to be like, well, is it good or bad? I'm not sure that we want them to necessarily tell us, you must do this, you must not do this. I think that what we're trying to do is to just understand what the issues and implications are. But I understand your urge, though, and I'm trying to figure out, how do we get there? How do we?
I just felt like it wasn't addressed, like, their tone was of, like, this is what we do. There was no, I don't know, I can't explain it.
Let's go to Kathy.
Just quickly, I think about what Brian had said. I think they're trying to reel in any kind of influence.
Yes, yeah.
And I think they're just trying to give us the facts. And I do get the sense that they do want to move forward, but they're trying not to pressure anybody or influence us. That's my sense. I
just didn't get like a clear picture of, this is where we are and this is where we could be.
Right.
I just don't feel that difference.
They may not have it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know, but that's scary too. Because I want to see a vision, so
Yeah.
if they don't have it and there's, I don't know.
I hear you.
Okay, let's go to Amy, because Amy has not been heard from.
So maybe it's up to us to speculate a little bit about what it could look like. They did mention briefly magnet teams, and they didn't talk any more about what that would be. Would there be some sort of collaborative way to create like specialized programs, sort of like what they have in Burlington, like the Sustainability Academy, things of that nature that would be really exciting. So maybe it's up to us to kind of generate some of those ideas and then go back to them and say, what do you think of this? Is this feasible? And they can say yes or no. I don't know.
Well,
something like that.
I think it's a great point, and I want to go back to something that Wes said to me during the break, and it reminded me that, this was our first conversation about curriculum, instruction, and assessment. As we move through this process, we may have them back. We may decide that we need to hear more about a certain area, a certain, question that keeps kind of, bogging us down. So, it may not be the last opportunity that we get to ask the question, well, what's the benefit? What's the outcome? What's the potential? So I just want to, I don't want people to sort of have the impression that this is it. This is the last time we can talk about curriculum, because we can certainly go back to it. Just because I'm concerned about time, I want to move us forward into the next agenda item, because I want to give us a chance to talk a little bit about communication and community engagement. I was delighted to discover between meetings that a task force has been created that is focused on helping to ensure that the communication about the committee's work is assisted. So it's great. It was great to know that the boards who actually charged the formation of our committee were so concerned about communication that they actually got together and said, let's talk about how we can communicate more effectively about the work that's happening. So once I get over the shock of knowing that there's already a task force, I think it's great to know that we've got some folks who are willing to help, willing to volunteer to help us with whatever we see as the key elements of communication and community engagement. The way that I've been thinking about it, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting and in my memo, is that we're still in the information gathering phase. And so maybe we want to approach the community engagement and communication aspect with that in mind for this first phase of our work. Maybe to just get an idea of what is the committee's thoughts on X, Y, Z. What, do we want to do a survey? Do we want to do a Facebook page? Do we want to do, I think those are the kinds of things I would like to hear from the committee about what, as we're in this beginning phase of trying to understand the issues, what do you see as the sort of priorities for communication, and what are the opportunities for community engagement? Tom?
I would love to see something going out to the community saying, what are your concerns
Yeah.
at this point? What do we need to be paying maybe closer attention to as we go through this? Because if we don't know what their concerns are, we could, get blindsided with whatever our recommendations are.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I had a concern when I read the task force, both being surprised. And structurally, I just don't understand what the communication link is between us and them. And that we really probably need to think about that sooner rather than later in order to really create clear communication, agreements about what it is. I mean, it's a wonderful resource, but
Sure.
it could blow up if we don't really have good communication.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to make sure of, and I think that there's goodwill there, is I want to make sure that as this group of folks that have gotten together and have offered to help communicate, I just want to make sure that they're acting on behalf of the committee, and that they're not, sort of going off in their own direction. And so that's one of the things that Kim and I had a conversation about the other day. Kim is part of that group. So one of the things we might.
Actually, I just.
I'm sorry?
Finished what you were saying, but I have a different thought about a liaison person
Okay.
not being a board member.
Right,
and
so one of the things we did
a
talk
better
about,
idea.
and one of the things that I think might be important is to, if we feel like having a more formal link with this group is important, we might want to have a couple of members perhaps of this committee be sort of formal members of that group, to just ensure that we're being well represented and that the work that, is being undertaken with the direction of the committee.
Well, and the other thing I wanted to say is that it strikes me that communication really, it's not just communicating out
That's right.
what is going on here, but that group could be really helpful in helping us get communications from their constituencies about
Sure.
what we should be thinking about, what you were saying, sort of what are their concerns. So it's a two-way communication, or we should make it a two-way communication.
Kim, why don't you jump in?
Shared that it was a commitment of all the boards as we were determining whether or not we were going to study, that there be a real intentional effort towards engagement so that it is that two-way exchange and communication, not just information dump at the end of the process, but that we have a better sense by intention of what is out there for questions and concerns, so we can figure out if we can study those and address them so that we can be responsive to them as opposed to reactive to them at the end. And I apologize that those of us who are board members sitting here, before we even voted to study, had talked about how important that was to us, to the work, and sort of forgot that that group had volunteered that they would do it, and this group hadn't been brought in on those earlier conversations. What we also learned as part of that is that the state funds aren't really available to be used for engagement, let's say. So it wasn't a matter of hiring somebody, it's getting some representation of volunteers that are willing to do it. And in this situation, what we have so far is board representation. Liz Subin, who's on the high school board, she was a co-facilitator of the Heart and Soul program in the Junction in the town and is really skilled in this area. So she's volunteered to lead that and absolutely take only what we're telling them to do, but support it in every way they can. So while in our earlier conversations I said I could be that liaison, I think it's a much better idea that since we already have a board person from all of our boards volunteering on that committee, that we would, if people are interested here, take however many number you think, Brendan, or we all think, and ask folks if they're willing to sort of be that link and attend both sets of meetings. And I like the idea for it not to be a board person. While I was willing to, not my favorite choice for what we can do together.
anyone, not to put you on the spot, but is there anyone that might be interested in helping facilitate the communication piece in particular? Yes, okay. And if you are, you know, please email me if you would rather not, maybe you want to think about it. But I do think it would be important, and I do appreciate your efforts so far, and the fact that you were, you know, at least willing to serve as that liaison. But I think it would be great if we could have maybe one or two others in addition to Kim, who would be willing to help us with this piece, because it is going to be absolutely crucial, whatever our recommendation, that we communicate clearly, we engage and hear from the community as well. So if you're willing to do a little bit of extra work and be that liaison, I would love to have you help us out in that way.
I nominate Tom James, he's very good handling the public and communicating.
Oh boy, Tom.
I think you got the right idea, get input, and not make a decision right now.
Okay, great. So we'll.
I just had two suggestions if you weren't done.
No, go for it.
One is that, like, sending out a survey that's just like, what are your concerns, it's biasing the survey. It's getting people to think about it negatively. So you could start with questions like, have you even heard of the Red Committee? Like, I mean, obviously whoever's in charge of this is gonna do this, but really, please don't just ask people their concerns, because why we would just wanna bias it to be negative or just positive. And the other thing would be, if somebody involved in communication could be not very deeply involved in education leadership as a background, because I feel like there are several of us who felt like the jargon was kind of dispiriting, and then there are several people who are like, this was a really excellent discussion, and I feel like there's sort of a breakdown between people who have a big background in education leadership, for whom this is how everyone talks, and it's very full of meaning, and people who don't understand all the jargon, who it's kind of like processing, even though they've got great things to say, I'm kind of missing some of it, and I'm sure that many people in the community will feel that way.
It's almost a different language.
So this is, yeah.
Along those same lines, I think the question that I would ask the community is, what is the information that you need in order to make a decision about whatever the study recommends? That way you're not asking about concerns. Maybe there's an even better way to do it. But I think that's what we need to know, is what does the community have to, what information do they have to have in order to feel they can make a decision?
One of the offers that's already been made is to, one of the ideas that also came up from one or two of the folks on the committee is the idea of a survey. Not a perfect tool, and can be used for good and evil, but it may be at least a beginning point for us. Liz Subin has offered to help kind of facilitate the construction of a survey for us. So that might be at least a starting point. Recognizing that it might be an imperfect tool, it might at least give us more information than we have currently about what is on the minds of the community, what's on the mind of the community. So is that something that, can I just get kind of like a yay if you're excited about that idea, or at least willing to let that idea move forward?
How is that survey going to be conveyed to the public?
Well, I think in the conversation, very brief conversation I had with Liz, it would be an electronic survey. So it would be through a tool called SurveyMonkey.
How would Joe Essex citizen know to look for it?
Well, we would have to do some promotion about it, so it would have to be something that we would communicate through Front Porch Forum, through email, through posting it in the library, flyers, that kind of thing. So I think we would ask maybe the Essex Reporter to help us publicize the fact that it's out there. But you're absolutely right, promotion of a survey is pretty important to make sure that people actually know it exists to take it.
Yes. I have been pleased with the coverage so far from the reporter, but I didn't notice, was there a reporter here tonight?
No, it's not.
I don't think there was.
No.
And I think it would be good, in light of that somebody send something to the Essex Reporter to let people know what we are doing on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, Mark?
So Heidi and I got together and we decided that, and hopefully it's okay that we did this independently, that we're going to do a post on our local Front Porch Forum after every meeting. And so the first one just talked about, the study, why Westford decided to be part of the study, what we've done, and the links to the web page. And I think putting those links out over and over and over and over is a good thing to do.
I did something similar. I created a group on Facebook called Essex VT, and kind of just said, hey, I'm very excited to be part of this group, and I think there were probably 18 comments. So I think having those conversations, whether they be on social media or at your coffee table, it's a great way to begin to sort of talk to your networks about what are the questions and concerns that you have. And so I think being a liaison for the committee in that way, even if it's semi-official, I think would be a great way to begin to sort of mine your own connections in the community. Kim?
Can we maybe do so with sort of a common base message, though, that whether it's you creating, Brendan, or whomever, that is our maybe 3 talking points out of each meeting, or some common sort of factoid of
Elevator speech.
Yeah, of what happened in the meeting, and then as Westford sends it to their Front Porch Forum from their folks, there may or may not be something on it that is different than that, but we would be speaking from a common voice and platform because on this committee, that's sort of our charge to sort of understand the information together and then ultimately get to one recommendation or not together at the end. And
Yeah, let me think about how we would actually coordinate that, but I think that's not, it's certainly a good idea to make sure that we're all, I guess, singing from the same songbook, so.
well, and maybe a common Facebook page does that, and then we can share it from each of our own platforms, or then the message goes once, but then every other way that we can disseminate it, we can capture that message and share it.
The other thought I had is because I think the website has some real potential as sort of the warehouse of all the information. It would almost be great if a summary document could be shared as part of the meeting wrap, so obviously you can read the minutes, but maybe like on the website itself, that's where the wrap could live and then can be shared from there, different places.
But even still, probably a 1 or 2 sentence sort of before you include the link.
Yeah.
Is the why would I even bother clicking on the link?
Sure.
I think,
right.
And that's sort of the highest note or the highest couple of notes from our conversation. You're really good at that, by the way. No pressure.
I'm just thinking too, I don't know if there's a link on those school websites, but there should be a, no?
There is
on the sites to be able to connect all these dots, so that families that are looking on the website for information or getting the school announcements, whatever they're getting, there's a link for them to find easily.
Okay, that would be great to make sure.
And I would be interested in being on not the communication liaison, but participating in putting together the survey.
Okay.
It's part of what I do at work, so I would like to participate in that piece.
So a temporary member of the committee.
Just a, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe we could connect you with Liz and
Right.
as we begin to work on that. Yes, Mitch?
It may be a little early now, but it should be considered, maybe you want to get the Free Press or some of the TV stations here one night when we're kind of really rolling along, so that the word gets out to a lot of people what we're doing.
Right.
And I think by that point, we'll have kind of a story that they can present to their viewers.
I think that I agree that the media in general is a good resource, especially for communications. I think that I'm most concerned about our local media, just because of, making sure our community is engaged. I think that because this is a statewide conversation, there will be some larger interest, for example, when we get to the stage of a recommendation. But I think that figuring out how to use other media is probably a good idea too. Any other thoughts on this? Yes.
I was just going to say, when you were talking about this one has a Facebook and that one, my concern is I think there are probably people that have a good idea of where they want to be at the end of this committee. And I just wanted, I don't know how we do it, but I think we have to be very careful. A decision hasn't been made yet.
That's right.
So those communications that we, as part of this committee, we have to be careful in our points of view or how we talk about it.
Right.
I really appreciate that comment, and I think that I agree with you that some folks, even myself, you know, we come in with our own biases and our own thoughts, our own preconceived notions. But I would agree that I would love for us to think very carefully, especially as you're interacting with your friends and your family and your neighbors and your networks. The committee really is still in the information gathering phase and the questioning phase and the exploration phase. And so while you personally may have a direction that you think you'd like to see us go, I think it really is important that we don't want, you know, the notion to get out there that we've already made up our minds, because I don't think we have as a committee. I think we've got a lot more work to do. So I would just be, while I want to encourage people to be out there talking and engaging with their circles, I just want to make sure that you are representing kind of where we are as a group.
Well, this has been a night full of acronyms.
Yes, another one for us?
And I came up with an acronym based on something you said, which I think I've probably heard 50 times so far in these meetings, and it's IWMITD, which is if we move in that direction. And I think we should keep that like on our forehead.
I love that. I love that. That's great. Yes.
At the acronym points, I mean, this is not an important point, but I really urge us to spell out RED, because we're going to become the Red Committee very quickly, and that's an acronym. I mean, I can't, half the time I don't remember what it stands for. I mean, we really need to spell it out.
That's a good point, yeah. The shorthand in this case might, you know, lead to unintended consequences.
Indeed.
Okay.
Just one last thing, a lot of things are either like the website is mostly information that we're putting out about what happens in the committee, and then other things like a survey are mostly bringing information in a confidential manner that can be digested. But when you get into Facebook, you run the risk of like that Latin motto debacle where like some people who don't really understand what's going on are saying crazy things and it becomes national news because of the comments. So if we're moving into things that are not curated or moderated, we should probably be careful, just because the conversation could quickly become
Yeah,
buy medicine from my website or something.
Right. Yeah, I think that, you know, it's a good point. I think social media can be a powerful tool for communication, but it can also be misused. And so I think we just need to be a little bit, you know, I come from a little bit of a different perspective because we use social media every day at work in terms of the work we do. So, but I do think that it's a very important point to say that, you know, you can't just put up a Facebook page and think that good things are going to happen. It's actually something that needs to be, you know, curated and actually cared for and kind of, you know, encouraged along. So we can think about whether or not we want to go down that route at a different meeting. But I think what I'm going to walk away with, and I just want to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page, is that the next step as far as communication and engagement goes, we're gonna see if we can get one or two other folks to serve as a liaison to the task force. We are going to work on the idea of maybe a summary of each meeting that can then be shared as sort of a baseline of this is what occurred at the meeting, this is the takeaway. And then we're also going to begin work on a survey that we would issue via SurveyMonkey and promote to try to get an initial read on some of the community's questions and or concerns. We'll figure out how to say it in a way that doesn't bias the results. So those are the three takeaways that I'm leaving about communication and engagement. Is there anything else, or did I get that right?
Yeah. Well, Martha's.
Kim, did you have a
Oh, no, I was just gonna comment, and he's moving on, but I was just gonna comment that Facebook I don't think is a great, because most people, I don't have Facebook, I refuse to get it.
Yeah.
And so I think it has to be something that, I think a lot of people access just the internet for information, like, you know, for school board and whatnot. And I think
that this website that we use for the study would be a great place to be posting stuff like that for, for feedback and stuff like that, because it's non-threatening.
Yeah,
I'm
I think-
threatened by Facebook, I refuse to do it.
I think that, to your point, it is absolutely true that not everybody is on social networks, and so I think the idea would be, let's just make sure that we are in enough places that, people can find us, people can access the information. I still feel like that the website is really a central point of at least an information repository that we can continue to push people to, and maybe make some elements of that site a little bit more shareable on social media as well, so.
Right, I was just gonna, one of the things, I was impressed with the work that the communications group was kind of engaging with the board with, and I think Keely's point in terms of making sure you have people who can talk in English as opposed to the education jargon, I think is an important one. I think that was one of the things I walked away with that, but I wondered if it's at all possible to have a member or two from that committee to be present to basically script that summary. So by the end of your meeting, you would have something, and kind of going full circle tonight, comes back to a little bit of a local spin. There might be an important piece that Westford needs to include in its statement, but here's the core statement. Essex Junction might have something else, but whether or not part of the role of that committee could actually be a presence, and then you're continuing that working relationship, and the public knows that you're engaged with them. And the second thing was Vince has been doing some work on this go-to-meeting option, which, if I'm correct in understanding, and Vince can fill in the blanks, but it would require a paid subscription, but it provides for 25 access to basically what the meeting content is on the screen. It doesn't allow you to kind of see the camera, people talking and everything else, but you would hear the conversation, and you would be able at home to be able to see the slides and the presentation. So that's something Vince has raised. It is another opportunity for people who may, for whatever reasons, be confined or not want to go out, to be able to see some of this. And you're going to get deeper into this as the weeks, months continue. So it may generate more interest. But one of the questions I had was, is the committee open to that being explored in terms of there's a cost? And I don't know how it fits into the scheme of things with the incentives for the study committee.
How much money?
I think it's $50 a month. So it's not, to me, it's not significant.
I say do it.
Yeah, I think that, we definitely would want to think about it a little bit more. I would love to figure out a way, even if it's not highly used, it's a great signal that we're trying to make, this experience, this conversation as open as possible. So even to just have the option available could have some great value.
Brian, did you mean that was for committee members or for anybody to participate?
For anybody, but if a committee member could not be present, you could be one of the people that get on for that evening type of thing. And there might
But
be
for
some time.
$50 a month, it could be anybody. It's not per head of who dials in, or Vince, if you don't.
25 concurrent users. So we would have a message that you all agreed on, come out and say, this is what's going on, click on this link, and we have it keyed to that PC up front.
Okay.
They would hear everything we say, thanks to the mics from either RETN or our team. They would not be able to see things. We have to figure that out if we wanted to.
You could do that on Skype for free.
It doesn't moderate, and Skype has a limitation, if I understand it correctly, of like 8 to 10. 25 would be sharing the screen, so every time somebody moved that screen, the people could follow along. You're exactly right. You could do it, no question about it. We looked at this to say, it's out there, it's given us another opportunity. It may not be perfect. You may want someone to moderate that and listen, because how would people that are watching want to say something? Does that get queued up? Is that something you want to do? But we can look at that if you wish.
Okay, great. Good for us to consider. Yes.
This is a loaded question, but should we be reaching out to the end users of what we're doing, students, and getting their input? And I don't know what the answer is. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
I think that it would make a lot of sense for us to engage more students than we currently are talking with.
Like 0 right now, right?
Well, Sam's here.
Sam's doing her best.
Sam's here. But, you know, I think stakeholders are, we might wanna begin to think about people as stakeholders, and so, what are the different stakeholder groups? There are parents, there are students, there are teachers, there are taxpayers, so we might wanna think about how do we engage those different groups in this conversation as we move forward. We're over time, and I try really hard to make sure we stay within the bounds of our time together, so, unless, there are any final thoughts, we're gonna close this part of the meeting.
Brenda.
I'm sorry?
So is somebody going to be assigned to create the 2 or 3 talking points from this meeting?
Are you volunteering?
No.
So the answer then is no, not until we decide that we have a volunteer to do that. So I'm comfortable if you want to continue your practice that you started last week.
Okay,
For this week.
I think we will share what we put.
That would be great.
That'd be great.
I should have thought of that,
That would be
Kim.
great.
Thank you, Kim.
Yeah.
So,
But like in our,
Yes.
community, there's a lot of people commenting on the red.
Right.
There's a specific group
Yeah.
that's really putting out information out there,
In a good way?
in a bad way.
Okay.
well, a group, 2.
Well, but they're putting information out there.
Sure.
We need to.
There's
putting
like
their
4 or 5
opinion.
people.
Okay.
They're putting their opinion, yes.
Okay. Well, I think,
And-
you know,
and-
it's, well, we want to hear everyone's opinion.
Yeah, that's important for us to hear.
Yeah, but maybe we could give them some nicer information, you know. Yeah.
Or is it-
I don't know, well, information.
Great.
So I just want to confirm our next meeting date and topic, and so our next meeting is actually on April 8th, and
Wednesday.
that is a Wednesday. And our special guest for that evening will be talking to us about special education and student support services. So that will be the main sort of focal point of the evening. Again, we are going to be challenged in getting you that information in advance. And so what we might have to do a little bit of a hybrid next time in terms of maybe a presentation. It might have to be a little bit more presentation next time. So just going to give you a little heads up on that. We're going to follow up on these community engagement pieces. And I also, you know, I really valued that 1-minute writing exercise. I'm not going to have you sit here and do it right now because I know people want to get home. But I would greatly encourage you to spend a minute capturing your thoughts about the meeting and sending it to Brian and I, because it was really a valuable, and it was a way to continue, for us to continue to think about how to make these meetings as effective as possible. So if you can do that in your spare time, like maybe right when you get home, that would be great.
Would it be the questions we've already asked, or is that already coded in?
Well, you know, we've collected a lot of the thoughts that were shared last time. We've collected those together.
No, I mean, but the stuff that's said tonight, should we re-say that again? Or
No, I don't think that's necessary, but if you walk away from tonight's meeting with some thoughts that you want to share about what worked, what didn't work, how can we make this better, please send those our way. Brian, do you have any closing thoughts before we adjourn?
The only thing I would really, in terms of adding any kind of structure to that 1-minute feedback, 1-minute write, is your sentiments about how much more from staff. I kind of was watching head nodding in terms of the points raised earlier in terms of can we get more in terms of, so what does Judy see as, what would it look like? You know, if you were going to do this, what would it look like and what would be the challenges associated with that? What do you think would be the good opportunities and experiences that would result? And do you want to hear more of that? Because I think that that's something that can be taken back to leadership, and we can work on how to frame those types of presentations as we go forward. And I think just to underscore Brendan's point that this may not be the only time you see these people, because you'll also have that opportunity to ask more specific questions as you become more informed. And I think you'll become more informed over the next 3 sessions.
I think that information that you just said Judy could do would be helpful to us. I have a concern if the public views it as the superintendent selling this to the committee. So I just think that's something we have to be really careful about.
And that's part of the reason for posing, because I think that there's a positive, because there can be a public perception, well, this is being pushed. And I think people are trying to be very sensitive from a leadership standpoint of not being in the pushing mode, regardless of what their sentiments might be in terms of the value. But it's also very appropriate for you as committee members to push the questions and say, okay, so we're looking for some more.
And I think the kind of list that Keely asked for would be very appropriate.
I had a suspicion it's not gonna look any very much different than it is now. I just, it may be that I'm not creative enough to see the problems, but I don't think, at least, I'm not familiar enough with Westford to know, but I suspect that Essex Town and Essex Junction are not that different. The people aren't different, the way of life isn't different. I just have a feeling it's gonna look pretty much, it would look pretty much the way it does now. Except maybe it would be cheaper.
Well, I think our challenge is to figure, as a committee, I think our challenge as a committee is to figure out exactly how would it be different? And would it be better? And I think those are the kinds of questions we need to keep asking. Right, or how could it be different, right?
Yeah.
And I heard Brian's question differently. I heard him say, for me to talk with groups and Mark that are presenting to you, so for your curriculum folks to talk about how it could look different. I think that's what I was hearing you ask tonight. Not only sort of challenges or opportunities, but some hopes and dreams of what it could look like. Or for special educators to talk about that through their lens, through programming for students. So, you know, I don't know, I definitely don't think the superintendent should say that because, you know, that would be framed politically in not a good way. But I think that that's the value of having the depth of the educators who are working really hard at trying to speak and without acronyms. But we were challenged when they came to us and said, should we bring, it would be great if we could bring some teachers to speak. And we didn't know, I didn't know how to give them direction at that point in time. So, you know, so when they ask us questions, sometimes I'm confused as far as what you really want. You know, would teachers be there to speak to programming that you might want to hear, or what that second grade teacher could say to the other from another school? I don't know. I think it's a little bit, because you're still in the information gathering stage, and once you know a little bit more, you can help inform us at maybe at the end of these meetings of Brian, or what the next presentation we'd like to have included from the groups that you've asked to present.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think in some cases, we just don't know what we don't know yet, and I think it would be really helpful. You know, we've got the next few meetings scheduled out, but I think as we continue these conversations, it will help to inform, you know, what the next theme or key or stakeholder group that we want to engage in would be.
Right.
So real quickly,
I think quickly, I was just gonna say that while we didn't get to ask the superintendents the same depth of questions that we did in this one, so I wouldn't necessarily view it as like a superintendent pitch in any way to say, now we understand the different structures, but can we hear a little bit more about sort of what is working really well that you want to preserve, what would be the opportunity if you had a different structure, or what's really limiting you in the current structure, like help us understand how to transfer that information into what we need to answer for this work. So we might want to invite them back and not, I wouldn't frame it or feel like it was asking for you guys to do a pitch.
so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Great.
Please take a cookie.